Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to stand on Earth long before humans, when our planet belonged to giants? Imagine the ground trembling beneath your feet, not from thunder, but from the footsteps of creatures so vast they seem to carry the world itself on their backs. Welcome, dear traveller, to a journey across time. Tonight, we're venturing 20 million years into the past, into the Jurassic period, a golden age for dinosaurs when life on land truly came into its prime. So wherever you are, curled up under a blanket, resting your head after a long day, let's drift together, not into sleep just yet, but into deep time. Close your eyes and picture it. The air is warm and rich with the scent of fern. Towering conifers stretch toward a sun that feels closer than it does today. Mist curls over swamps. Dragonflies the size of your hand skim the surface of ancient lakes. And somewhere beyond the trees, a distant rumbling call rolls through the forest, the unmistakable sound of a dinosaur greeting its world. This was the age when life flourished like never before. The Jurassic wasn't just another chapter in Earth's story. It was the era when dinosaurs became architects of the land. Some grazed peacefully in herds across vast plains, necks sweeping the treetops. Others stalked silently through ferns and shadows, eyes sharp, tails steady, every movement a whisper of survival. It was a time of balance and wonder, where land, sea, and sky were all alive with motion. Beneath the waves, marine reptiles glided like living submarines, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs twisting through sapphire depth. In the sky above, the first true flyers, the pterosaurs, spread leathery wings against the dawn, claiming the air for the first time in history. But beyond the spectacle of teeth and scales was something subtler, the rhythm of a world learning to breathe, to grow, to become what we now call home. The Jurassic was Earth in bloom. Forests stretched from pole to pole, rain fell in steady, nourishing cycles, volcanoes roared and cooled, shaping continents that were only beginning to take the forms we recognize. Dinosaurs weren't just surviving, they were thriving, diversifying, evolving into forms as strange as they were beautiful. Some grew massive, their bones light yet strong as bridges. Others stayed small, nimble, clever, testing the boundaries of adaptation. Each one, in its own way, was part of a vast experiment in life's creativity. And as you listen, imagine yourself walking among them. You push aside a fern taller than you are. The air hums with insects. Somewhere, a great shadow moves through the canopy. A sauropod, perhaps, its head rising like a ship's mast through the trees. You hear the rustle of leaves, the splash of a stream, and the heartbeat of a world that has no name for you yet. This was the Jurassic Earth, a planet both alien and familiar, where every sunrise revealed a landscape alive with change. It's humbling, isn't it, to think that this same world, spinning quietly beneath us now, once rang with the calls of creatures lost to time. So, as we step into this journey together, let your thoughts wander. How did these giants live? What worlds did they build and destroy? And what traces of their age still echo beneath our feet? If this kind of slow drift through deep time stirs your curiosity, I'd love for you to join me on the rest of this prehistoric voyage. Tap like, share your thoughts in the comments. What's the first image that comes to mind when you think of dinosaurs? And don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter of this ancient story. Now take a deep breath. The air smells of pine and rain. The earth is young again, and the age of dinosaurs has just begun. Let's journey together back to the Jurassic. Once upon a time, if you can call 2,000 million years ago once, the world was a single landmass, a supercontinent, enormous and proud, named Pangaea. From space, if you could have looked down then, it would have looked like a colossal puzzle piece, a single sweep of brown and green, stretching across half the planet, girdled by a single endless ocean called Panthalassa. But even the most monumental things in nature are not meant to last forever. Beneath Pangaea's vast plains and rugged mountains, something restless was stirring. The Earth's crust, those mighty slabs we now call tectonic plates, was beginning to fidget. At first, the movement was almost imperceptible. The supercontinent's side shifted slightly, cracked faintly along lines invisible to the creatures walking above. But deep below, heat and pressure brewed like a slow-boiling cauldron. Magma surged, mantle currents twisted, and the crust began to stretch, thin and split. It was as if the earth itself was whispering, "Change or perish." The breaking of Pangaea was not a single dramatic event. It was a long drawn-out symphony of separation, played over tens of millions of years. Imagine a jigsaw puzzle slowly deciding that it no longer wished to fit together. The first fractures appeared in what we now call the Central Atlantic Rift Zone, a sprawling scar that would one day become the Atlantic Ocean. Lava oozed from the widening cracks, cooling into new rock. Basalt plains spread like dark ribbons across the land, marking where the Earth had begun its continental redecoration. As the rift widened, water began to creep in, tentative at first, collecting in long, shallow basins. These were the seeds of the Proto-Atlantic, a newborn ocean still in its cradle. Over millions of years, that trickle of seawater would widen into a vast blue expanse, dividing Pangaea into two great children, Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. Laurasia would one day give rise to North America, Europe, and Asia. Gondwana would drift and fragment into South America, Africa, India, Antarctica, and Australia. But at this stage of the Jurassic, they were still close enough to wave politely across the narrow young sea that was forming between them. Picture it, molten rock, bubbling along the seams, continents trembling like vast ships pulling away from a common dock. The Earth was at work, busy with reinvention. Volcanoes dotted the landscape like fiery punctuation marks, spewing ash and molten stone into the skies. Mountain chains rose where plates collided, the crust wrinkling and folding under the strain of its own rearrangement. In some regions, molten magma pressed upward but never quite broke through, cooling underground into enormous chambers of crystalline rock. Elsewhere, great rivers of lava hardened into vast plateaus of basalt, layers upon layers of the planet's own handwriting. This was tectonic drama on a planetary scale, slow enough to take millions of years, yet powerful enough to reshape the face of the world. If you had been standing anywhere near one of those early rift zones, you would have felt it, not as an explosion, but as a deep vibration through the soles of your feet. The ground would have trembled with quiet authority. Perhaps a fissure would split open nearby, glowing faintly red as magma pushed upward from the mantle, exhaling heat and new stone. Around you, the air would have smelled faintly of sulfur and transformation. The Earth was alive, and in the Jurassic it made sure everyone knew it. Across what would one day be North America, the breakup of Pangaea left a patchwork of rift valleys, long sunken troughs where the crust stretched and sagged. These valleys filled with lakes and rivers, carving their own miniature worlds within the greater transformation. To the east, the edges of what would become Africa and South America began their slow, dignified drift apart. They were not rushing. Continents rarely do. They glided like dancers in a slow-motion waltz that lasted tens of millions of years. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, now a 16,000-kilometer chain of underwater mountains, was being born in those moments. A fiery seam sewing new crust to the ocean floor. Magma surged upward, cooled, and spread outward, creating new oceanic plates that pushed the continents ever farther apart. It was, in a way, Earth's version of breathing. Inhale magma, exhale stone. The continents, meanwhile, were restless artists, experimenting with form. Laurasia began to tilt and twist, creating what would later become the North American Cordillera, the ancestral roots of the Rockies. In places like present-day Scandinavia and Siberia, ancient shields of rock heaved upward, reminders of older collisions long since buried by time. Gondwana, too, was far from quiet. Great mountain ranges rose along its interior where land masses collided, precursors to the Andes, the Drakensberg, and the Transantarctic mountains yet to come. Beneath these forming continents, mantle plumes, columns of molten rock rising from deep within the earth, punched through the crust like cosmic welding torches. One such plume, the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, became one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history. It spilled out more than 2 million cubic kilometers of lava, spreading across what would one day be North America, South America, and Africa. To put that in perspective, that's enough lava to bury modern France under a layer several kilometers thick. It was as though the Earth, feeling cramped in its old shell, had decided to burn its way into something new. These volcanic outpourings left behind hardened layers of basalt that still underlie parts of modern continents today, a reminder of the Jurassic's fiery temperament. Even now, when you walk across certain valleys of Morocco, Brazil, or the eastern United States, you are walking on the cooled remains of that planetary temper tantrum. And the Earth, as if pleased with its handiwork, began to paint new landscapes upon its ever-changing canvas. Where continents pulled apart, new coastlines emerged. Raw and jagged, their cliffs still steaming from fresh creation. Where plates collided, mountain ranges thrust skyward in slow, inexorable motion. Rivers rewrote themselves, tracing new paths across unfamiliar terrain. Lakes formed in rift basins, bordered by fresh volcanic rock. Geologically, the Jurassic world was an artist's studio, a place of relentless experimentation. Nothing stayed the same for long. You might imagine that all this upheaval would make life difficult, and yet, paradoxically, it did the opposite. The tectonic chaos of the time created a mosaic of environments, uplands, valleys, islands, and coastal plains that became perfect laboratories for evolution. New habitats meant new opportunities, and life, as always, was quick to seize them. But that is a story for another night. For now, we stay with the rock and the fire, the bones of the planet itself. If we could watch it in time-lapse, we'd see the continents drifting like slow dancers in a cosmic ballet. Eurasia slides northward. Gondwana stretches south. The ocean basins open like yawning mouths. In some regions, ancient mountain chains are torn apart, their roots scattered and reassembled in new configurations. And in the background, the planet hums, not metaphorically but literally. The grinding of plates produces vibrations that travel through the earth, a constant, low-frequency music beneath our feet. Even today, seismographs pick up these murmurs, faint echoes of the movements that began in the Jurassic. As Pangaea continued to unravel, fault lines deepened, and magma chambers swelled. Some eruptions were brief, spectacular fountains of fire that lit the prehistoric skies. Others were vast and slow, spilling sheets of lava across entire regions, hardening into new crust as they cooled. The world's surface was being recycled, rejuvenated. In some places, like the Tethys region, the ancient ocean that stretched between Laurasia and Gondwana, the Earth experimented with subduction zones, where one plate slid beneath another. These zones birthed volcanic arcs and island chains, the ancestors of today's Mediterranean and Himalayas. Everywhere, igneous activity, the birth of new rock from molten fire, was shaping the planet's destiny. Beneath the waves, new crust formed in endless repetition. On land, ancient crust was uplifted, folded, and sometimes swallowed back into the mantle. It was geology in motion, slow, patient, and absolute. The continents weren't merely moving, they were becoming. Imagine Africa and South America, still side by side, their edges snug as puzzle pieces. You could have walked theoretically from what would one day be Brazil to what would become Angola without ever seeing an ocean, but underfoot, the crust was stretching, cracking, whispering that a great separation was coming. Over millions of years, those whispers became rumbles, and those rumbles became the Atlantic Ocean, a newborn sea widening with every century. The Atlantic, in its earliest form, was not yet majestic. It was a narrow, elongated gulf, filled with young seawater and bordered by volcanic cliffs, but the forces that birthed it were unstoppable. Even as lava cooled on one side, new magma rose on the other, pushing the plates apart inch by inch. And inch by inch, the face of the Earth transformed. The oceanic crust, newly minted at the spreading ridges, was thin and hot. As it moved away, it cooled and thickened, sinking slowly into the abyssal depth. Meanwhile, sediment carried by rivers from the rising continents settled on the ocean floor, building layers that would one day become the geological records of this restless age. This was a time when the planet wrote its autobiography in stone: basalt, granite, sandstone, and shale. Each layer a sentence, each fault a dramatic pause. And through it all, the Earth seemed to have a sense of humor. For every mountain it raised, it tore another down. For every ocean it opened, it closed another. For every quiet plain it created, it sprinkled in a few dozen volcanoes, just to keep things interesting. If you could stand above it all, floating somewhere in the sky of the Jurassic, you'd see a world in motion, continents drifting, seas expanding, magma glowing faintly through fissures that crisscross the planet like veins of fire. You'd see entire landscapes shift shape over eons, rivers changing course, mountain peaks rising and collapsing under their own weight. You'd see, in short, a living world, not static, not serene, but dynamic, temperamental, and endlessly creative. And perhaps, if you listened closely, you'd hear it. The Earth's quiet mantra, spoken through the groaning of its crust and the hiss of cooling lava. Change is life. Movement is survival. Nothing stays forever, not even continents. So when you look at a modern map and trace the shapes of the continents, the bulge of Brazil matching the curve of West Africa, the scattered islands of the Caribbean marking the seams of ancient rifts, you're not just looking at geography, you're looking at the echoes of Pangaea's long goodbye. A breakup, yes, but one that gave birth to the world we know. From that shattering came the diversity of landscapes, oceans and ecosystems that would nurture the rise of dinosaurs, mammals, birds, and eventually us. The very ground beneath your feet is part of that legacy, a fragment of an ancient whole, still moving, still murmuring the same eternal refrain, "Don't stand still. The earth never does." And somewhere, deep below, the plates are still dancing to that ancient rhythm, slow but unstoppable. The same rhythm that began in the Jurassic, when Pangaea finally decided that being one was not enough, that it was time to become many. The steamy breath of the Jurassic, a planet wrapped in warmth and rain. If you were to step out of a time machine and onto the surface of Earth during the Jurassic period, the first thing you'd probably notice after your jaw drops at the size of the local wildlife is the air. It would feel heavier, thicker, more indulgent somehow, as if the whole planet were wrapped in a great invisible blanket. The world was quite literally steaming with light. The Jurassic climate was a masterpiece of warmth and wetness, a long greenhouse chapter in Earth's story where the temperature rarely dipped below pleasant and often climbed into a lush, humid haze. Global averages hovered between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius, a comfortable warmth if you enjoy tropical vacations, though perhaps a bit overwhelming if you're wearing more than a fern leaf. There were no polar ice caps, no glittering glaciers, no breath of winter to be found. The poles were not frozen deserts, but gentle, forested lands. Even the highest latitudes enjoyed a kind of endless spring. The air itself was different, richer, denser, carrying more carbon dioxide than the modern atmosphere could dream of. Estimates range from 1,000 to 2,000 parts per million, about 5 times what we have today. It sounds alarming to our 21st century ears, but to the Jurassic Earth it was simply the rhythm of life. That extra carbon acted like a thick quilt over the planet, trapping heat, amplifying evaporation, and pumping moisture into the skies. If modern Earth is a cozy room with a fireplace, the Jurassic was a sauna with every vent sealed shut. Rain was not a seasonal guest. It was a constant companion. Clouds built themselves from the ocean's generous evaporation, drifted inland, and poured themselves out in grand theatrical downpours. It was a world of thunder and mist, a hydrological symphony that never quite ended. Rivers swelled and changed course often, waterfalls roared across vast green basins, and the air shimmered with perpetual humidity. You would have felt it on your skin, the soft stickiness of life in overdrive. In this great greenhouse Earth, seasons existed more as whispers than as rules. There were variations in daylight and rainfall, but snow was as rare as silence in a jungle. The planet's tilt and orbit still played their roles, but with no ice sheets to build or melt. The contrast between seasons softened. The tropics remained perpetually lush, while temperate zones enjoyed climates that today would rival the Amazon or the Congo. It was a world designed not for hardship, but for growth. The oceans, too, were warm, gentle basins that spread heat across the planet. Warm currents circulated freely from equator to pole, distributing energy like a planetary bloodstream. Even the deep waters were milder than those of modern seas. This warmth kept the global engine humming. More heat meant more evaporation, more clouds, more rain, an elegant cycle that turned Earth into a planet-sized terrarium shimmering under the prehistoric sun. And oh, that sky! The atmosphere was thicker with moisture and haze, giving the light a golden, filtered quality. Sunsets were likely magnificent. Crimson and amber stretched across humid skies, refracted through clouds heavy with water vapor. Lightning storms, too, were frequent guests. Imagine the spectacle, towering thunderheads rolling across fern forests, sheets of rain cascading down over herds of sauropods, each thunderclap echoing off canyon walls and mountain ridges, still young from Earth's restless movements. This climate wasn't just warm, it was creative. Warmth and moisture are the twin engines of life, and during the Jurassic they worked overtime. The dense, carbon-rich air acted like fertilizer. Plants loved it. Photosynthesis, that quiet chemical miracle, thrived in the heavy carbon dioxide-rich atmosphere. Ferns, cycads, and conifers grew thick as walls. Horsetails towered like small trees. The world was a riot of green forests, sprawling from equator to poles, jungles that never slept, and wetlands that shimmered with the reflection of endless clouds. The Earth, it seemed, had turned itself into a great botanical experiment, and the results were spectacular. Vegetation covered every inch of land that wasn't buried under volcanoes or flooded by shallow seas. Plants pumped oxygen into the air in return, feeding the gigantic lungs of the creatures that roamed among them. If you'd taken a deep breath, it might have felt exhilarating, like inhaling the energy of a living planet. And in this vast hothouse, the dinosaurs flourished. Warm-blooded or cold, scaled or feathered, they thrived in a world that asked nothing of them but to grow, eat, and adapt. The warmth spared them the struggle of icy winters, allowing reptiles to expand their empire from tropical coasts to high latitudes. The great sauropods, with their enormous bodies and slow metabolisms, were particularly at home here. The air carried enough oxygen, the plants grew fast enough, and the warmth ensured that even the nights were comfortable. Smaller dinosaurs, too, found their niches. Insects and early mammals scurried through thick undergrowth, while pterosaurs soared through air currents rich with moisture and heat. Life, in short, had no off-season. But let's not imagine this world as uniformly gentle. The warmth had a wild side. Rain didn't fall politely, it pounded, often with the force of monsoon after monsoon. Lightning storms flashed across the skies like the pulse of the planet itself. The air, already thick with vapor, often shimmered with heat waves that blurred the horizon. In some regions, the ground steamed after heavy rains, creating mists that lingered for days. It was beautiful, yes, but also primal, unpredictable, untamed. Even the deserts where they existed were different. Without major ice caps or strong temperature gradients, wind patterns were less violent, and the great sand seas of later epochs were rare. Instead, the driest regions of the Jurassic were more like scrublands or savannas, green enough to sustain herds, warm enough for life to persist year-round. The planet, it seems, had little interest in emptiness. The absence of polar ice changed everything. Without those reflective white caps, more sunlight was absorbed by land and sea, reinforcing the greenhouse effect. The sea levels were higher, the coastlines broader, and shallow inland seas covered large portions of the continents. These seas acted like climate amplifiers, absorbing solar energy and releasing it slowly, keeping the global thermostat set firmly on tropical. It's worth pausing here to appreciate just how strange this would feel to us. Imagine Earth without ice, without snow, without the crisp bite of winter. Rivers never froze. Rain fell on forests that stretched nearly to the poles. Even the Arctic Circle was green. The temperature difference between the equator and the poles was smaller than it is today, meaning that air currents moved differently, more sluggishly, spreading warmth evenly like butter melting on hot bread. The Earth was, in essence, running on low contrast and high humidity. The great wind systems of our time, jet streams, polar vortices, were softer then, gentler. Storms were frequent but less destructive. Their fury spread over days rather than hours. The entire atmosphere seemed to operate in slow motion, heavy with moisture, patient in its rhythms. One might call it the planet's golden age of comfort. If comfort includes the occasional torrential flood, volcanic haze, and thunder that rattles bones. And let's not forget the chemistry of that air. With so much carbon dioxide swirling through the sky, the atmosphere itself was a collaborator in Earth's drama. Volcanoes, ever generous with their emissions, fed the air with carbon dioxide and sulfur compounds. Over time, this cocktail of gases stabilized into a balance that favored warmth and fertility. Oceans absorbed much of the carbon, turning it into carbonates and shells. Plants pulled the rest from the air, locking it into wood, bark, and peat. It was a planet-sized carbon cycle operating at full throttle. But even in its excess, this system was self-sustaining. The Earth didn't overheat catastrophically. It found equilibrium. The Jurassic greenhouse was steady, resilient, and astonishingly stable over millions of years. Compared to the sharp climatic swings of other epochs, it was a long exhale, a planetary sigh of contentment. In that stability, evolution had time to play. Species didn't have to scramble to survive ice ages or rapid droughts. They could specialize, diversify, and grow large, very large. The warm nights and consistent rainfall encouraged gigantism. Plants grew tall and dense, which in turn fed herbivores the size of buildings. And those herbivores in turn fed predators that tested the limits of muscle and bone. It's a curious truth of biology that warmth begets abundance, and abundance begets extravagance. The Jurassic Earth was extravagant in every sense, green beyond imagination, noisy with life, shimmering with moisture and heat. Now imagine the sensory details, the smell of wet vegetation, rich and earthy, the hiss of rain hitting giant leaves, the sound of thunder echoing across canyons where rivers carved through red clay. Steam rose from the ground after every storm, and the air tasted faintly metallic, charged with ions from constant lightning strikes. Even the night sky glowed faintly, as if the air itself held onto sunlight long after dusk. This was not a gentle planet, but it was a generous one. It fed its forests, filled its rivers, and warmed its creatures. It was Earth in its most exuberant mood, the kind of mood that encourages experimentation, biological, ecological, and evolutionary. If you could stand at the equator and look around, you'd see a horizon shimmering with life. Every leaf glistened with dew. Every surface reflected the humid air's embrace. And if you traveled toward the poles, expecting a chill, you'd find instead vast forests of conifers and ginkgos, their needles and fan-shaped leaves rustling in warm breezes. It was the same song everywhere: warmth, wetness, growth. Even the atmospheric pressure may have been slightly higher, the air more buoyant, allowing flying creatures, pterosaurs, and the earliest birds to soar with ease. Some scientists imagine them gliding effortlessly across thermal updrafts that rose from the planet's endlessly wet forests. The Jurassic sky was not empty. It was alive, painted with wings and stormlight. The rain, meanwhile, was tireless. It came in cycles, heavy monsoons followed by gentler drizzles, punctuated by stretches of glowing, misty calm. The sound of rain was probably never far away. It nourished the forests, eroded the mountains, carried minerals into rivers, and filled inland seas. The water cycle was in perfect harmony with the greenhouse warmth, creating a planet that was, quite literally, self-watering. It's hard not to see a touch of humor in it all. The Earth, having split its continents and stirred its mantle, now seemed to be saying, let's see what happens if I just turn up the humidity. The result was a world perpetually in bloom, one that needed no seasons to remind it to grow. And yet, beneath that humor lies awe. The Jurassic climate was not a mere background condition. It was the engine that made the entire age possible. Without its steady warmth and generous rains, the lush ecosystems that defined the Jurassic, those fern forests, those towering sauropods, those glittering seas filled with ammonites, could never have existed. The Earth of that time was not just a planet, it was a living greenhouse, vast and vibrant, humming with photosynthesis, drenched in sunlight, soaked in rain. It was a world that knew abundance intimately, and it shared that abundance with everything that called it home. So if you ever find yourself dreaming of another world, one both alien and achingly alive, think of the Jurassic, a time when the planet itself was in its tropical prime, when no ice dimmed its edges, and every raindrop seemed to whisper the same message from the heart of the Earth. Stay warm, stay wet, grow endlessly. The continental kingdom, forests, swamps, and the hidden gardens of the Jurassic, Imagine standing at the edge of a world that feels halfway between dream and memory, a place where the air hums with life and the land itself seems to breathe. This was the continental Earth of the Jurassic period, an age when the continents were newly separated and the planet was covered not in cities or fields, but in endless, tangled wilderness. It was as if the world had decided to become a garden, a vast, unruly one, where everything grew, climbed, crawled, or thundered through the underbrush. Stretching from horizon to horizon were forests so immense that they could swallow modern nations whole. Conifer trees, tall and stoic, ruled these lands like living spires. They were not quite the same as the pines or firs we know today, though they were their ancient ancestors. Araucaria, Cheirolipediaceae, and Podocarpus, with trunks as wide as small houses and branches that clawed at the sky. Their needles formed thick canopies that filtered sunlight into golden dust, and the forest floor beneath them was a kingdom of shadow and steam. Between those towering sentinels grew a riot of other plants, ferns as tall as people, horsetails like green bamboo, and cycads, stout and symmetrical, with leaves that looked like living sculptures. These ancient ferns and cycads gave the land a kind of prehistoric lushness, a sense that every surface was alive. Some of them reached the height of small trees, unfurling fronds the size of sails. Beneath them, mosses carpeted fallen logs, and lichen-decorated stones with tiny, colourful constellations. This was not a tidy forest. It was wild, layered, humming with insects and small creatures. The ground squelched softly underfoot, damp with decay and rebirth. The smell of resin, sap, and wet bark filled the air. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the canopy like columns of honey, catching on drifting spores and clouds of pollen. And within this green labyrinth, the dinosaurs moved, some slow and majestic, others swift and silent. Herds of long-necked sauropods lumbered through the trees, swaying gently like ships on a slow tide, their heads high above the canopy. With every step, the ground trembled, shaking loose ferns and startling small creatures into the air. Where they passed, they left behind trails of crushed plants and steaming footprints that filled with rainwater and became miniature ponds. Smaller dinosaurs, feathered and agile, darted between trunks, hunting insects or keeping a wary eye on the shadows. You could almost hear the rustle of a Dilophosaurus slipping through ferns, its crested head glinting briefly in the filtered light, or the cheering call of early avian species testing their wings among the branches. In the lower valleys, where rivers meandered and overflowed, the forests gave way to swamps and wetlands, great glimmering mosaics of water and green. Here, giant horsetails and tree ferns thrived, their roots tangled in black, oxygen-poor mud. The water was slow and shallow, thick with decaying leaves and buzzing clouds of dragonflies the size of your hand. Crocodile-like reptiles basked on the banks, their eyes half-closed, their hides camouflaged against the dappled light. Frogs, insects, and primitive turtles filled the air with small, continuous sounds, a background music for the great age of reptiles. These Jurassic swamps were both beautiful and treacherous, rich with life yet heavy with decay. The water smelled faintly metallic, the mud swallowed careless steps whole, and the air shimmered with heat and movement. But they were crucial, cradles of biodiversity where amphibians thrived, plants reproduced in abundance, and dinosaurs came to drink and feed. Herbivorous giants waded through the shallows, stripping leaves from cycads, while predators waited patiently at the edges, eyes gleaming above the waterline. Sometimes the forests would open into vast floodplains, where rivers braided themselves into countless channels, spreading nutrients and sediments across the land. In these plains, vegetation grew thick and fast, an open buffet for the herbivores of the age. There you might find a herd of Stegosaurus, their plated backs shimmering in the sunlight, sweeping through cycads like living bulldozers. Nearby, nimble ornithopods grazed in groups, always listening for the approach of something heavier, something with teeth. And somewhere beyond the greenery, deserts and arid basins stretched inland, remnants of Pangeia's once vast interior. They were not lifeless, but they were different. Deserts of red dunes and rocky plateaus, dotted with tough shrubs and low conifers, wind carved strange shapes into stone. and lizards skittered across hot sand. Even here, dinosaurs endured, small, wiry hunters that could tolerate the heat, and thick-skinned herbivores that could travel long distances between oases. The air shimmered above the sand like a mirage, and every oasis was a stage for survival. But the forests always called the strongest attention. They were the heart of the Jurassic land. Picture a conifer forest at dawn, mist rising in long tendrils, dew glistening on fern fronds. Somewhere deep in the trees, a Brachiosaurus raises its neck to pluck leaves, 50 feet above the ground, the sound of its chewing blending with the rustle of wind. Through the canopy, a family of small, feathered dinosaurs scurries between its feet, foraging for insects in the moss. The air vibrates faintly with the calls of creatures that have no names in our language, only the memory of their echoes preserved in stone. And then, as the day brightens, the forest comes alive with movement. Insects shimmer through sunbeams. A pterosaur glides over the treetops, its shadow crossing the moss like a slow wave. Somewhere nearby, a predator bellows a deep resonant sound that sends ripples through the leaves. Life here is constant, abundant, and utterly unhurried. Everything grows, feeds, and decays in an endless cycle of motion and sound. The coastal lowlands were another wonder. Between the forests and the open seas stretched vast wetlands, tidal flats and mangrove-like swamps where salt and fresh water mingled. The tides sculpted channels that gleamed under the sun, and the air was filled with the scent of brine and vegetation. These coastal realms were nurseries of life, home to amphibians, small reptiles, and early mammals. Here young dinosaurs hatched and learned to walk, while flocks of primitive birds picked through the mud for crustaceans and insects. At low tide, you might see footprints preserved in soft clay, sauropods, theropods, even small bird-like dinosaurs, all crisscrossing each other, recording a day's passage in patterns that would someday turn to stone. These were the world's first land diaries, written not in ink but in footsteps and silt. Even the mountain valleys, newly formed by the planet's shifting crust, hosted their own miniature ecosystems. In sheltered basins, forests of cycads and ginkgos took root, forming emerald amphitheaters between stony ridges. Rainwater pooled in hidden lakes, surrounded by reeds and fern thickets. Herds of herbivores migrated through these corridors, followed by predators that moved like shadows through the mist. Everywhere you looked, life was improvising. Plants adapted to shade or sun, dryness or damp. Some evolved thick bark to resist hungry jaws. Others grew quickly and died young, betting on speed over defense. Dinosaurs mirrored that variety, some slow and immense, built for steady grazing, others fast and sharp, built for ambush. The land was not static, it was a stage for perpetual invention. In the open clearings where sunlight poured freely, the ground glittered with spores and pollen. The air was thick with insects, beetles, flies, and early bees buzzing from cone to cone, oblivious to the towering giants walking nearby. The soil beneath the surface teemed with worms and burrowing creatures, aerating the earth for the next generation of plants. Even decay was a form of creation here, feeding roots and fungi that knit the forest floor into a living web. One could say the Jurassic continents were alive in stereo, a chorus of dripping leaves, snapping twigs, buzzing wings, and distant bellows. Every sound was part of the planet's great composition, and at night, when the heat softened and the forest sighed, fireflies and bioluminescent insects painted the darkness with tiny trembling lights. To walk through such a world would be overwhelming, yet strangely peaceful. There was no silence, but there was harmony. Everything had a place, the predators in their shadows, the herbivores in their herds, the trees in their towering patience. It was a planet that had perfected coexistence through sheer abundance. Even the soil itself was extraordinary, dark, mineral-rich, full of ancient nutrients, carried from volcanoes and rivers. It smelled fertile, metallic and alive. In some regions, layers of decaying vegetation built up over millennia, forming deep peat bogs that would one day become coal. Every leaf that fell, every fern that decomposed, became part of the Earth's memory. It's easy to imagine the Earth smiling during the Jurassic, proud of its handiwork. Look, it might have said, what happens when you give life a little space and time? The continents were playgrounds of evolution. the forest's cathedrals of growth. Dinosaurs didn't just live here, they were sculpted by it, shaped by every tree they grazed and every swamp they crossed. If you had a drone, somehow unaffected by 150 million years of time, and could fly it across the Jurassic world, you'd see endless mosaics of green and gold forests stretching into mist, swamps glinting with sunlight, red deserts bordered by dark green conifer belts, and rivers looping like silver veins across the land. The continents, though not yet as far apart as they would one day be, already carried their own personalities, each a living, breathing landscape of complexity. And above it all, the skies. Warm air rose from the forests, lifting the calls of creatures into the clouds. It was a soundscape as rich as a rainforest symphony. Growls, trills, chirps, croaks, all layered over the whisper of wind through needles and leaves. The forests were not quiet places, they were orchestras, each note another heartbeat in the great pulse of the Jurassic. Somewhere, a stegosaurus swings its tail lazily at a swarm of insects. Nearby, a pack of Allosaurus moves through the underbrush, their eyes glinting as they watch the herd beyond. The mud squelches beneath their feet. A frog leaps into the water. A dragonfly lands on a fern and takes off again. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is still. This was the Earth at its most theatrical, dramatic in color, texture, and scale, but also deeply intimate in its details. Every leaf, every ripple of water, every footprint told part of a larger story. The story of a planet that had found its rhythm and was playing it at full volume. So if the Jurassic continents were a garden, they were not a manicured one. They were wild, radiant, and unpredictable, a living experiment in excess. The Earth had split its lands apart, filled them with forests, painted them with swamps, and sprinkled in deserts just to keep things interesting. And through it all, life flourished, loudly, joyfully, relentlessly. It was as if the Earth, breathing deeply through its forests and ferns, whispered the same invitation to all its creatures. Grow tall, wander far. The world is yours. The Jurassic oceans, where dinosaurs did not rule. If the continents of the Jurassic were the lungs of the planet, breathing out forests and ferns and thunder-footed life, then the oceans were its great, pulsing heart, vast, glittering, and very much alive. They stretched across nearly every corner of the globe, their surfaces shivering with sunlight, their depths echoing with motion. This was a world that belonged not to dinosaurs, but to an entirely different kind of majesty. The seas of the Jurassic had their own emperors, their own dramas, and their own myths written in waves instead of dust. The two great oceans of this age were Panthalassa, the vast remnant of the superocean that had once surrounded Pangaea, and the Tethys Sea, a younger, warmer body of water nestled between the slowly drifting continents of Gondwana and Laurasia. Panthalassa was almost unimaginable in scale, an expanse of blue so endless it seemed to curve back into itself, its horizons hazy with distance and mist. The Tethys, by contrast, was more intimate but no less grand, a cradle of coral reefs, lagoons and tropical shallows that shimmered beneath the sun like liquid gold. Together, they made up most of Earth's surface, and they were not quiet. Beneath the rolling waves, entire worlds thrived, ecosystems that rivaled anything on land, filled with creatures strange and wondrous, ferocious and fragile. The waters of the Jurassic were warm, not tropical in spots, but tropical almost everywhere. Average surface temperatures may have ranged from 25 to 30 degrees, with hardly a chill even near the poles. These were oceans that felt like warm baths beneath the sun. Currents flowed smoothly between latitudes, carrying heat, salt, and nutrients around the globe in steady rhythms. Upwellings brought minerals from the deep to the shallows, feeding blooms of plankton that turned the water milky green in places. The seas teemed with microscopic life, and that abundance rippled upward through every level of the food chain. Floating on those gentle currents, ammonites spiraled through the water, elegant, coiled mollusks that looked like living jewelry. Their shells glimmered in the sunlight, marked with iridescent patterns and fine ridges that caught the light as they turned. They drifted and darted, propelled by little jets of water, hunting small crustaceans or algae. They were everywhere, the butterflies of the Jurassic seas, delicate but innumerable. But if ammonites were the ornaments, the rulers of these oceans were far from delicate. They were the marine reptiles, a lineage of air-breathing giants who had returned to the sea and conquered it utterly. The ichthyosaurs were among the most astonishing of these. Imagine a dolphin sculpted by an artist who preferred drama to restraint. Sleek, muscular, with a long snout bristling with conical teeth and eyes, the size of dinner plates. They were lightning in reptilian form, built for speed and precision. Some species, like Ophthalmosaurus, had eyes so large they could see in near darkness, hunting in the twilight zones of the ocean, where sunlight faded into blue mystery. Others leapt from the water like silver blades, catching fish mid-air before sliding back into the depths with barely a splash. They ruled the mid-water realms, fast, agile, and endlessly hungry. A single ichthyosaur could cover hundreds of kilometers in a week, following schools of fish or trails of squid. They gave live birth at sea, their young emerging tail first into the watery cradle of the Jurassic world. No nests, no eggs, only motion forever. The sea was their home, their nursery, their kingdom. Then there were the plesiosaurs, elegant and strange, like myths brought to life. Their bodies were long and barrel-shaped, with flippers that worked like wings beneath the waves. But it was their necks that captured the imagination. Impossibly long, flexible arches of vertebrae that stretched ahead of their bodies like periscopes. A plesiosaur could glide through the water with its head weaving gracefully through schools of fish, plucking prey as delicately as a heron in a pond. Some grew to 15 meters in length, their movements slow but deliberate, like ballet dancers in a liquid stage. Others, like the pliosaurs, were their shorter-necked, heavier cousins, faster, bulkier, and more ferocious. Their jaws were massive, lined with teeth as long as steak knives, capable of crushing anything unfortunate enough to cross their path. Leopleidron, the apex predator of the Jurassic seas, could reach 20 meters in length and weigh as much as a small whale. It was said that when one surfaced, the waves themselves bent around it in deference. These creatures didn't chase their prey so much as appear from nowhere, bite and vanish again into the blue. The oceans were also home to the ancestors of modern sharks, smaller than their Cretaceous descendants, but already perfect in their design. Silent, efficient hunters of the shallows, rays too glided along the seabed, and small bony fish darted among coral reefs that looked almost modern, their shapes familiar yet subtly alien. The reefs themselves were magnificent, built not by corals alone but also by sponges and algae, their framework sprawling across the warm shallows of the Tethys, like living cities. Everywhere there was motion. Schools of fish shimmered like curtains of silver beneath the waves, parting before the shadow of a passing pliosaur. Giant crabs scuttled over the sandy bottoms, and starfish spread their arms across rock and shell. Jellyfish pulsed through the sunlit zones, their translucent bells glowing faintly in the filtered light. It was a planet that had truly discovered the beauty of excess. And yet, amidst all this abundance, there was a quiet difference, one that set these oceans apart from the land. Here the dinosaurs held no dominion. The kings of the continents were nothing in the sea. The rules were written anew beneath the waves. And the reptiles that ruled here were of another order entirely. They were not land lizards who wandered into the surf. They were masters of the sea in their own right, honed by evolution into forms that land dwellers could never match. It's a humbling thought. While the dinosaurs thundered across the continents, the seas were whispering their own stories, entirely separate yet deeply intertwined. The ichthyosaurs didn't care who roamed the forests above. The plesiosaurs had no interest in herds or territories. The marine world was its own empire, invisible to those who lived on land, yet vital to the balance of the planet. The Tethys Sea, in particular, was a jewel of the Jurassic. Picture a vast, shallow expanse of turquoise water stretching from what would one day be the Mediterranean to the edges of Southeast Asia. It was ringed by coral reefs, dotted with islands, and rich beyond measure. Nutrients poured in from rivers and upwellings, feeding plankton blooms that turned the sea into a living soup of energy. Sunlight pierced its surface in golden beams, illuminating clouds of drifting life. Here the plesiosaurs glided gracefully through the warm shallows, their long necks swaying as they hunted small fish. Above them, pterosaurs skimmed the waves, dipping their jaws into schools of prey like living fishing rods. Deeper below, ichthyosaurs raced through the dim blue, hunting squid-like belemnites, whose ghostly bodies flashed in the dark with bursts of bioluminescence. Every layer of the sea had its residence, from the sunlit surface to the mysterious depths. The surface world was all movement and color, waves sparkling, creatures leaping, life feeding on sunlight. The midwater realm was quieter, a blue twilight where sound carried farther than sight, and hunters moved like shadows. The abyssal depths, though less populated, were far from barren. Strange invertebrates and ancient fish lingered there, waiting for the rain of organic particles that drifted down from above, the slow snow of life. Even the soundscape of the Jurassic oceans must have been remarkable. The clicks of ichthyosaurs hunting by echo, the low rumbles of plesiosaurs, the crackle of reefs filled with invertebrate life, all mingled with the constant rhythm of waves and currents. It would have been less like noise and more like a language, the ocean itself speaking in vibrations and hums. In these waters, evolution was playing with form and function like a sculptor with endless clay. Some creatures became streamlined missiles of muscle and bone. Others became armored fortresses, covered in shells and plate. A few learned to hover, others to sprint, others still to vanish into transparency. Life was improvising constantly, adapting not just to survive, but to thrive in every available niche. And through it all, the oceans glowed with fertility. Volcanic activity beneath the seafloor released minerals into the water, feeding microbial blooms. The warm, stable climate ensured that life didn't have to start over every few centuries. Instead, it could build layer upon layer, reef upon reef, generation after generation. The result was a richness of life that rivaled any rainforest that would ever exist. It was, in every sense, a golden age for the seas. Even the surface itself was a theatre of life. The sunlight glimmered off the backs of ichthyosaurs as they breached, sending droplets into the air like diamonds. Plesiosaurs floated lazily between dives, their necks rising through the waves like living question marks. From above, they looked like moving islands, their shadows long and soft in the clear water below. And yet, for all their power, even these rulers had their limits. The ocean, vast and merciless, cared for none of its inhabitants. Storms could rise without warning, turning gentle seas into roaring tempests. Waves higher than houses could scatter even the strongest swimmers. Deep currents, cold and dark, could trap and drown the unwary. Predators became prey, hunters disappeared into mouths larger than their own. The ocean was both cradle and killer, serene one moment and savage the next. Still, in its balance, it was perfect. Every death fed another life. Every drop of waste became food for something smaller. The Jurassic oceans were a self-renewing engine, recycling matter and energy with quiet efficiency. It was as though the sea had found a way to sustain eternal motion without exhaustion. Imagine drifting beneath the surface, the water pressing gently against your skin, the light dappling above. Around you, fish scatter like flakes of light. In the distance, a plesiosaur glides, neck curving like a ribbon, flippers beating in slow synchrony. Far below, a shadow moves, an ichthyosaur, sleek and sure, vanishing into the deep. You feel the hum of the currents, the pulse of the living ocean, all around you. This was the other Jurassic world, invisible to the land dwellers, but every bit as grand. While dinosaurs stomped and roared above, these seas were writing their own history in silence. Fossil beds from today's England, Germany and Madagascar preserve their legacy in exquisite detail: vertebrae, shells, teeth, and even stomach contents. They are reminders that while the land told one story of dominance and power, the ocean told another, one of grace, balance, and the endless play of adaptation. And perhaps if you listen closely to the waves even now, you can still hear the echoes of that ancient sea, the whisper of water against scales, the rush of flippers through the depths, soft crackle of coral cities long turned to stone. The Jurassic oceans were never ruled by dinosaurs, but they were no less spectacular. They were the Earth's vast mirror, reflecting life's imagination in every shimmering surface and hidden trench. The land might have had its giants, but the sea had its monsters, and they were beautiful. So, as the Earth rolled on beneath its sun, with continents drifting and forests thriving, the oceans continued their quiet empire. Warm, generous, and full of motion, they whispered their own version of creation, one of fluid grace and perpetual renewal. And if the earth itself could have spoken then, standing at the edge of that endless blue, perhaps it would have smiled and said, "Let the land have its thunder. The sea has its own miracles." Life in the Jurassic, dinosaurs and their many remarkable friends. If you could travel back 70 million years and stand on the surface of Jurassic Earth, the first thing that would strike you, aside from the fact that you were suddenly breathing prehistoric air full of pollen and mystery, is how alive everything felt. The land didn't just host life, it burst with it. From the treetops to the ferns underfoot, from the distant thunder of footsteps to the whirring of ancient wings above. Every inch of this world was animated, in motion, a masterpiece of evolution, in full bloom. This was the age of dinosaurs, but not dinosaurs alone. It was the golden theatre of life, where the earth, warm and generous, invited every possible shape and size of being to step onto the stage. The dinosaurs, of course, took the lead roles. They were the headliners, the crowd pullers, the ones whose shadows still haunt our imaginations. The Jurassic was their great ascent, the time when they diversified, multiplied, and mastered nearly every terrestrial niche. And what a cast they were! There were the theropods, sleek and ferocious, the sauropods, long-necked titans who stretched the very definition of size, and an array of other herbivores and predators that filled the land like a moving, roaring tapestry. Let's start with the theropods, those agile, bipedal hunters who ruled the predator's realm. They came in all sizes and styles, from small, feather-fringed sprinters to giants whose footsteps could rattle the bones of smaller creatures. Among them prowled the Allosaurus, perhaps the most famous Jurassic carnivore, a beast roughly the length of a bus, with jaws that opened wide enough to swallow you whole and teeth curved like sabers. Allosaurus wasn't just big, it was efficient. Its strong hind limbs propelled it forward in powerful strides, its tail balancing every movement like a counterweight in a deadly ballet. But Allosaurus wasn't alone. The Jurassic was full of predatory variety. Ceratosaurus with its horned snout, Megalosaurus stalking the floodplains of what would one day be Europe, and smaller, nimbler hunters like Compsognathus, no bigger than a turkey but quick enough to snatch a lizard in mid-dash. These were not mindless brutes. They were finely tuned instruments of survival, eyes forward, senses sharp, their world defined by the thrill of pursuit and the art of patience. And yet, for all their menace, even the fiercest predators seemed to move through a world made to humble them, because towering above them all were the sauropods, the plant-eating giants, the living skyscrapers of the Jurassic forests. Imagine a creature as long as 5 elephants, placed nose to tail, as tall as a 4-story building, and yet so graceful that it could pluck leaves delicately from treetops without crushing the ground beneath it. That was Brachiosaurus, the gentle giant with 4 limbs longer than its hind limbs, giving it the posture of a giraffe on a monumental scale, its neck arched toward the canopy like a living bridge between earth and sky. When it moved, the trees themselves seemed to sway in deference. Then there were the Diplodocus, with their whip-like tails that could snap faster than the speed of sound, the Apatosaurus, heavy as a dozen elephants, but capable of traversing vast plains in slow, rolling herds, and the Camarasaurus, shorter and stockier, but every bit as magnificent, its bones filled with air sacs, that made its immense body buoyant enough to move with surprising grace. These sauropods were more than animals. They were ecosystems in motion, carrying with them colonies of insects, birds and parasites, reshaping forests as they grazed. Their constant feeding kept plant life in check, while their droppings fertilized the ground, completing a natural cycle as elegant as it was colossal. Of course, where there were giants, there were challengers. The sauropods often hunted in packs or took advantage of the weak and the young, but even a hungry Allosaurus had to think twice before attacking a fully grown sauropod. One swing of a tail, one misstep near those pillar-like legs, and the hunter could become the hunted by sheer accident. Many of these encounters must have ended not with a kill, but with mutual respect and a cautious retreat, a prehistoric standoff written in thunder and growls. Beyond these titans, the land was alive with smaller, equally fascinating dinosaurs. The stegosaurs, for example, wore armor like living fortresses. Stegosaurus, with its double row of plates along its back, and a spiked tail called a thagomizer, a word invented much later, but too delightful to ignore, was a marvel of defensive design. The plates may have helped regulate heat, or simply served as intimidating billboards in the biological arms race of the Jurassic. Imagine a herd of them, moving slowly through a fern meadow, their plates catching the morning light like bronze shields. Then there were the ornithopods, nimble herbivores like Camptosaurus and Dryosaurus, who moved in herds and grazed on cycads and low-lying vegetation. They were the runners of their world, alert, quick, always watching the horizon for a flash of teeth. Their success came not from strength, but from community and awareness. Where a sauropod's defense was mass, an ornithopod's was motion. Together, these creatures filled every ecological role, from the tallest browsers to the smallest grazers. But the Jurassic world didn't just belong to the heavyweights. Look up, yes, even higher than the tallest trees, and you'd find the sky alive with creatures unlike anything the Earth had ever seen before. The pterosaurs, these were the first true flyers, the masters of the Jurassic air, and they were as varied and astonishing as the dinosaurs below. Some were tiny, no larger than a crow, flitting between branches and plucking insects from the air. Others were giants, like Pterodostro or Rhamphorhynchus, with wingspans that could shade a small group of humans and beaks lined with delicate filters for straining plankton or fish. Their wings were thin membranes stretched between elongated fingers, literal winged hands, supported by lightweight skeletons of hollow bone. When they launched from cliffs or treetops, they didn't just fly, they soared, surfing the thermals with effortless precision. And oh, the spectacle they must have made at dawn and dusk. Thousands of them rising into the glowing skies above the wetlands, gliding silently over the rivers and forests below. Some nested in colonies, others roosted alone, their silhouettes scattered across the horizon like drifting kites. They were the Earth's first attempt at flight on a grand scale, and they did it with flair. Down on the ground, the air was alive with the rustle of plants that seemed almost alien to modern eyes. Cycads, with their stout trunks and spiral crowns of leathery leaves, dominated much of the landscape. These were the ancient cousins of palms, though less forgiving and far older in lineage. They thrived in the warm, humid air, their slow growth and tough leaves providing reliable food for herbivores. Then there were the ferns, the quiet architects of the forest floor. They grew everywhere, from the damp shadows of conifer forests to the edges of rivers and swamps. Their delicate fronds unfurled in the humid air, catching droplets of water and light alike in places where the giants couldn't reach. The ferns reigned supreme, carpeting the land in endless green. Among them sprouted ginkgos, with their fan-shaped leaves fluttering in the breeze like small green flags. These trees were living fossils even then, having already survived countless millennia of change. Their seeds fed smaller reptiles and early mammals. Their canopies provided shade for herds on the move. And towering above them all were the conifers, the evergreens of the Jurassic world, ancestral pines, cedars, and araucarias that reached for the heavens. Their cones were treasures of nutrition. Their resin perfumed the air. When sunlight filtered through their needles, it painted the forest floor in shifting mosaics of light. The sound of the wind through their branches must have been constant, a soft whispering music that mingled with the calls of creatures great and small. The plants weren't mere scenery. They were the foundation of the Jurassic ecosystem. They fed the herbivores which fed the carnivores which fertilized the soil, which grew more plants. It was a perfect loop, a self-sustaining feast of energy and adaptation. The cycads and ferns didn't know it, but they were the silent co-stars of this age, the green engines that powered the drama of evolution. The smaller creatures, the supporting cast if you will, were no less vital. Early mammals, timid and mouse-sized, scurried through the undergrowth, nocturnal survivors in a world too large for them. They ate insects, seeds, and occasionally the leftovers of dinosaur kills. Though small, they were clever, adaptable, waiting patiently in the wings for their moment to shine, which wouldn't come for many millions of years. Insects, too, were everywhere. Buzzing, crawling, pollinating, decomposing. Dragonflies with wingspans the size of dinner plates skimmed the air over swamps, while beetles burrowed through bark and soil. The Jurassic landscape was never still. It hummed with movement at every scale. Even the soundscape would have been extraordinary. Imagine standing in a Jurassic Valley. You'd hear the rhythmic chewing of sauropods, the low rumble of their calls echoing through the mist, the chattering of smaller dinosaurs moving through brush, the shriek of a theropod somewhere distant, the flutter and croak of pterosaurs aloft. And beneath it all, the soft, endless whisper of insects and leaves. It was an orchestra of life, grand and unpredictable. The diversity of this era was not just biological, it was architectural. Every ecosystem, from forest to floodplain to desert edge, had its own cast of players, its own balance of predator and prey, its own strategy for survival. The dinosaurs were not just big reptiles, they were specialists, each shaped by the environment around them. Some grew tall to reach leaves, others couldn't. Some stayed small to slip through ferns and roots. Some hunted in packs, others stalked alone. Evolution in the Jurassic was an artist without restraint, sculpting in bone and feather and scale. And perhaps what's most astonishing is how familiar it all feels. Strip away the strangeness, the tails, the claws, the teeth, and the same patterns persist today. Herds and hunters, flyers and burrowers, grazers and scavengers. The cast has changed, but the play continues. The Jurassic didn't just fill the Earth with life. It wrote the rules of ecology that still guide us now. It's tempting to imagine the Earth of that time as a noisy, chaotic mess of creatures competing for dominance. But in truth, it was more like a grand choreography. Each species had its place, its rhythm. Even death was part of the order, feeding new growth, returning energy to the cycle. The forests were thick, the air was rich, and the world was alive in a way that defies quiet description. And through it all, the dinosaurs stood as emblems of possibility. They weren't just big, they were brilliant in design. They embodied adaptation, long necks for reaching, strong legs for running, keen eyes for hunting. Their bones were light but strong, their lungs efficient, their forms endlessly inventive. Some bore feathers, others armor, others yet horns and crests that may have been used for sound, color, or courtship. The Jurassic Earth was an evolutionary playground, and the dinosaurs were its artists. Above them, the pterosaurs painted the sky with motion. Around them, the cycads and conifers grew thick and fragrant. Beneath them, the mammals waited in shadows. Together, they formed a picture of balance, so intricate it could have been orchestrated by the planet itself. So when we speak of the Jurassic, we aren't just talking about dinosaurs, we're talking about a living symphony, every note in perfect counterpoint, from the smallest insect to the mightiest sauropod. Everything mattered, every footprint, every spore, every call echoed through the deep history of life. And if you could stand there at dusk as the sun sank behind fern-covered hills and the silhouettes of giants moved across the horizon, perhaps you'd feel what the Earth itself seemed to be saying in that golden age. Diversity is survival. Grow, move, breathe, and live. There is room for all. The rise of the giants, from humble origins to the golden age of the dinosaurs. If you could rewind Earth's clock and watch the story of life play out in fast motion, you would see the age of the dinosaurs unfold, not as a sudden explosion, but as a slow, confident crescendo. A song that began quietly in the Triassic dusk and swelled into the roaring symphony of the Jurassic. In their earliest days, dinosaurs were not the thunder-footed rulers of legend. They were small, swift, and uncertain, scrappy survivors in a world still dominated by other reptiles. But the Earth, ever generous to those who adapt, was about to change the stage beneath their feet. And in doing so, it gave them their crown. The story begins over 230 million years ago, in the Triassic period, a time when the continents were still fused together into one great landmass, Pangaea, and the climate was harsh, hot, dry, and unpredictable. Life had only just begun to recover from the greatest extinction event in Earth's history, the Permian-Triassic extinction, which had wiped out nearly 90% of all species. The world was open, empty niches waiting for innovation. And from that emptiness, the first dinosaurs emerged, small and curious, running on two legs through the shadows of larger, older reptiles. These early dinosaurs, creatures like Eoraptor, Herrerasaurus, and Coelophysis, were not giants. They were more like the size of dogs, or small ostriches, quick-footed, light-boned, and opportunistic. Some hunted insects or small animals, others nibbled on plants. Their bodies were designed for speed and balance, long tails as counterweights, hollow bones to keep them agile, and sharp senses that allowed them to see and react faster than their sluggish contemporaries. They were, in essence, evolutionary prototypes, the first whispers of what the future would hold. But they had something special, something subtle yet decisive: posture. Unlike most reptiles of their day, dinosaurs stood upright, their legs tucked beneath their bodies instead of sprawling to the sides. It was a revolution in engineering. This vertical stance allowed for efficient movement, better endurance, and stronger locomotion, advantages that would carry them far. They could run longer, breathe more deeply, and keep their bellies off the hot ground. In the grand race of evolution, posture gave them the lead. Still, the Triassic world was not theirs alone. Crocodile-like archosaurs, early mammals, amphibians, and other reptiles shared the landscape. The dinosaurs were clever, but not yet dominant. That would come later, after another great turning point, one of Earth's signature acts of selective drama. Around 20,000 million years ago, the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event struck. Volcanic eruptions, greenhouse gases, and shifting climates erased many of the dinosaurs' competitors, including the vast reptilian clades that had kept them in check. When the dust settled, the stage was clear. The survivors looked out upon a reshaped world, one warmer, wetter, and filled with possibility. It was, in many ways, a planetary reset, and the dinosaurs, with their upright stance, efficient lungs, and adaptable bodies, were perfectly poised to seize it. As the Jurassic period dawned, the dinosaurs began to transform. What had once been a scattered collection of small runners became a diverse empire of forms. The evolutionary tree branched and blossomed in every direction, filling every niche from the ground to the canopy. Some species grew massive, others refined speed or cunning. It was the biological equivalent of a creative boom, a golden age of experimentation. Three great lineages took shape, defining the Jurassic's cast of characters: the theropods, the sauropods, and the ornithischians. The theropods were the inheritors of the original dinosaur blueprint, bipedal, agile, and built for pursuit. From their Triassic ancestors, they refined their forms into sleek predators. Their hind legs became muscular and powerful. Their forelimbs grew sharper and more dexterous. Their jaws lengthened, their teeth serrated like steak knives. Some species evolved feathers at first for insulation, later for display, and eventually for flight. The theropods were innovators, engineers of efficiency and agility. In the Jurassic, they diversified wildly. Some grew modestly large, like Dilophosaurus with its twin crests and theatrical gait. Others became apex hunters, capable of bringing down creatures many times their own size. But there were also the small ones, fast, bright-eyed, and clever. They hunted in packs, scavenged where they could, and explored the possibilities of intelligence and cooperation. The theropods were restless, adaptable, and always hungry. For food, yes, but also for opportunity. Then came the sauropods, and with them a new definition of grandeur. They began modestly enough. Early forms like Vulcanodon and Barapasaurus were merely large by Triassic standards, perhaps 10 meters long. But as the Jurassic unfolded, they embarked on one of the most astonishing size experiments in the history of life. Their necks lengthened, their torsos expanded, and their legs thickened into living columns. Their hearts grew strong enough to pump blood to heads 5 stories high. Their skeletons, ingeniously lightweight despite their size, were honeycombed with air sacs that kept them buoyant. By the mid-Jurassic, the sauropods had become living monuments. Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, Camarasaurus, and their kin, they dominated the forests and plains, moving slowly but inexorably across the land like floating islands. No creature on Earth before or since has achieved such consistent gigantism. Their success was not simply a matter of eating more. It was a profound evolutionary partnership with the plants around them. As the forests grew dense and tall, the sauropods grew taller still, their necks like living cranes, plucking at the treetops. The earth whispered, "Grow," and they listened with every bone. The third great lineage, the Ornithischians, took a different path, one of caution, creativity, and community. These were the plant eaters who didn't rely on sheer size alone. They were smaller, often faster, and better equipped for defense. Their hips were built differently, a backward-pointing pubis that allowed for larger digestive systems to process tough vegetation. They were, quite literally, built to graze. From these humble beginnings came a multitude of forms. The early armored stegosaurs with their plates and spikes arranged in elegant defense, the nimble ornithopods, who moved in herds and relied on speed and awareness, and later the horned and duck-billed dinosaurs who would flourish in the Cretaceous. But even in the Jurassic, the Ornithischians were already experimenting, sprouting plates, tails, and attitudes. Evolution had given them one command: survive creatively. Together, these three groups, the theropods, the sauropods, and the Ornithischians, painted the Jurassic world in motion. From the canopy to the clearings, from the floodplains to the fern meadows, every layer of the landscape had its inhabitant. Dinosaurs were not just survivors anymore. They were architects of ecosystems. They shaped forests by grazing, spread seeds in their dung, and even influenced the evolution of plants themselves. In a sense, the Jurassic world was co-authored, half by the green pulse of vegetation, half by the thunderous footsteps of its animal inhabitants. As the Jurassic forests thickened and the air filled with humidity, the dinosaurs adapted beautifully. The sauropods evolved flexible necks to reach into high canopies and across wide feeding ranges. Some developed peg-like teeth for stripping leaves, others spoon-shaped ones for slicing through softer vegetation. Their lungs, interconnected with air sacs, allowed for deep, efficient breathing, a necessity for such colossal bodies in warm air. Meanwhile, the theropods refined their senses. Their eyes grew larger, capable of tracking movement in dim forest light. Their hearing sharpened, tuned to the rustle of prey in the ferns. Some evolved feathers or down, helping them regulate body temperature in shifting conditions. Others developed intricate displays, crests, frills, or bright colors to communicate dominance or attract mates. They were as much artists as assassins, each species fine-tuned to its ecological stage. The Ornithischians, for their part, embraced social living. Fossilized trackways reveal herds moving together, perhaps protecting young or migrating in search of food. Their teeth evolved complex grinding surfaces, capable of breaking down fibrous plant material. Some may have used vocal calls or body language to coordinate a murmuring society of grazers beneath the canopy. If the Triassic dinosaurs were improvisers, the Jurassic ones were composers. They had mastered the art of living in harmony with a changing Earth. But how did they grow so large, so varied, so dominant? Part of the answer lies in the world they inherited. The breakup of Pangaea created new habitats, isolated valleys, mountains, rivers, and plains that encouraged diversification. Evolution loves a boundary, and every new rift and ridge became a laboratory for adaptation. Isolation bred innovation. What started as one family of upright reptiles became a dynasty of diversity. There was also the matter of metabolism. Many Jurassic dinosaurs, particularly theropods and smaller species, likely had warm-blooded traits. They were active, fast-growing, and capable of regulating their internal temperatures more precisely than cold-blooded reptiles. This metabolic flexibility allowed them to colonize environments that their ancestors never could. It was not fire in their bellies, but energy in their design. And of course, there was time, millions upon millions of years of it. Evolution, given patience, tends toward extravagance. Every generation of dinosaur was a tiny experiment, a variation on a theme. Some changes failed, others succeeded spectacularly. The result, after tens of millions of years, was a gallery of forms so varied that the word dinosaur barely captures it. By the mid-Jurassic, the transformation was complete. What began as a handful of small, fleet-footed reptiles had become an empire of land giants, aerial acrobats, and herding grazers. The Earth had gone from barren plains to living cathedrals of greenery and bone. It was a world so full of motion that even the stillness had rhythm. Imagine standing in that golden age, the Jurassic heartland perhaps 60 million years ago. To your left, a herd of diplodocus sways through a forest of conifers, their tails cracking like distant thunder. To your right, a pack of small theropods darts between ferns, eyes glinting in the filtered light. Overhead, a pterosaur glides on a thermal, its shadow rippling across the canopy. In the distance, the slow chorus of herbivores rumbles through the air, a sound so deep it feels like part of the landscape itself. You are witnessing evolution in its prime, a world no longer testing ideas but celebrating them. The dinosaurs had done it. They had risen from the margins of survival to become the undisputed architects of life on land, and the earth, it seems, was proud of them. For in every fern, every seed, every footprint fossilized in ancient mud, you can almost hear the planet's gentle encouragement, the same message it had been whispering since those first small Triassic runners took their cautious step. Grow, change, reach higher. The Golden Age awaits. Allosaurus, the apex hunter of the Jurassic. If you were to step quietly, very quietly, into the humid forests of Jurassic North America, you would not be alone for long. The air would hang heavy with mist and the scent of resin. Ferns would brush against your legs. Somewhere in the distance you might hear the rhythmic crack of branches and a deep, resonant thud, footsteps, measured and confident. The forest would fall silent, except for the whisper of your own heartbeat. Then, out of the green haze, a shape would emerge. Tall, lean, balanced on two muscular legs, its head moving like a pendulum as it surveyed its domain. This was Allosaurus, the undisputed apex predator of its world, standing roughly 4 meters tall at the hip and stretching between 9 and 12 meters in length. Allosaurus was no casual hunter. It was the embodiment of predatory design, sleek, intelligent, and terrifyingly efficient. The name Allosaurus means different lizard, a reference to the unusual shape of its vertebrae, but the name could just as easily describe its difference from everything that came before it. It was the predator perfected, a blend of strength, speed, and strategy that defined the Jurassic's wildest edges. Allosaurus lived primarily in what is now North America, though fossils have been found across Portugal and even parts of Africa. In its prime, it roamed through the lush, fern-carpeted valleys of what we now call the Morrison Formation, a vast swath of floodplains, conifer groves, and wetlands that stretched across the western United States. Here the air was warm and wet, thick with the breath of plants and the calls of giants. Herds of long-necked sauropods moved through the forests, and it was among them that Allosaurus made its living. Unlike the cinematic image of a solitary hunter, evidence suggests that Allosaurus may have hunted cooperatively at least some of the time. Picture it, a small group of these predators, their scales glistening with humidity, moving with practiced stealth through the trees. One circles to the flank, another waits downwind, while the leader, perhaps the largest female, advances slowly, eyes fixed on a sauropod grazing at the forest's edge. Communication would have been subtle posture, sound, a flick of the tail, then in a burst of speed, they would lunge, the forest exploding into chaos. Allosaurus wasn't built for brute wrestling matches like later predators such as Tyrannosaurus rex. Instead, it was an athlete of precision, relying on agility and timing. Its long hind legs could propel it in short, powerful sprints, while its tail, thick and muscular, acted as a counterbalance, allowing sudden turns mid-stride. Its arms, though short by our standards, were strong, tipped with 3-fingered hands that bore wicked claws, each up to 15 centimeters long. These claws could hook into prey, slash through hide, or hold struggling victims in place long enough for the jaws to do their work. And what jaws they were! The skull of Allosaurus was a masterpiece of natural engineering, light yet strong, with a system of flexible joints that absorbed shock and allowed wide movement. Its jaws could open to an almost unbelievable angle, some scientists estimate up to 80 degrees, like the gaping hinge of a living bear trap. Inside were dozens of serrated knife-like teeth, each around 10 centimeters long, designed not to crush but to cut. When Allosaurus bit, it didn't simply clamp down, it slashed. With each downward motion of its head, the teeth acted like saw blades, slicing through flesh and muscle with terrifying efficiency. Paleontologists believe that Allosaurus employed a unique hunting method, sometimes called the hatchet attack. Rather than delivering bone-crushing bites like later tyrannosaurs, it may have used the weight of its skull and neck muscles to swing its head downward, jaws open, striking repeatedly in rapid, hacking motions. Imagine an enormous, bipedal predator performing the evolutionary equivalent of a butcher's chop, tearing chunks from its prey with every strike. It was messy, but it worked, and it had plenty to hunt. The Morrison ecosystem was bursting with herbivorous dinosaurs, Stegosaurus with its formidable tail spikes, Camarasaurus and Diplodocus with their towering necks, and smaller prey like Dryosaurus darting between ferns. Each presented a different challenge, and Allosaurus, adaptable and cunning, seemed equal to them all. Fossil evidence even shows healed bite marks on some sauropod bones, proof that prey sometimes escaped, but not before enduring a close encounter with the different lizard. The life of an Allosaurus was one of constant motion. It would have roamed wide territories, following herds across river valleys and open forests. Its senses were finely tuned to this humid, lush environment. The large orbits in its skull suggest excellent vision, perhaps even some depth perception, vital for judging distance in pursuit. Its nasal cavities hint at a keen sense of smell, allowing it to track prey or the scent of carrion across miles. And in the dense, wet air of the Jurassic, where sound carried strangely through the trees, an Allosaurus could likely hear the low rumbles of distant herds long before it saw them. Despite its fearsome reputation, Allosaurus was not invincible. Fossil evidence shows that individuals suffered injuries frequently, broken ribs, tooth marks and gashes that had healed over time. These predators lived dangerous lives, not just from hunting but also from conflict with their own kind. Paleontologists have found Allosaurus skulls with puncture wounds that perfectly match the teeth of another Allosaurus. Whether these were the result of territorial fights, mating contests, or squabbles over carcasses, one thing is certain: this was a species that did not take insult or hunger lightly. And yet, for all its violence, there's something almost elegant about Allosaurus. Its design speaks of balance rather than brutality. Its skeleton was lightweight but powerful. Its body a symphony of moving parts, built for efficiency. Even its skin, though long vanished, likely played a role in camouflage, perhaps patterned in mottled greens and browns to blend with the forests. In life, it may not have looked monstrous at all, but rather like a creature perfectly at home in its world. The humid forests of Jurassic North America were a paradise for a predator like this. The dense vegetation offered cover, while the perpetual warmth kept prey abundant year-round. Rainfall was frequent, feeding rivers that wound through the valleys. And in those rivers dinosaurs came to drink. Allosaurus would have known these places well. It may have waited motionless among the trees, its breath slow and steady, eyes locked on the water's edge. And when the moment came, it would strike with explosive precision, an ambush artist, cloaked in the language of stillness. There's a kind of poetry to its presence in that world. Every ecosystem needs its balance, its checks and counterweights. The sauropods shape the forests by eating them. The Allosaurs shape the sauropods by hunting them. Evolution, in its endless dialogue, used predators like Allosaurus to keep the system alive and dynamic. Without hunters, the world would stagnate. With them, it thrived in rhythm, growth, death, renewal. And what of the young Allosaurs? Fossil evidence suggests that hatchlings were already agile, born ready for the chase. Their growth rates were astonishing. Within a decade, a juvenile could reach lengths of several meters. They may have been pack-raised, protected by adults, or perhaps, like many reptiles today, they were on their own from birth. Either way, their survival depended on instinct and speed. A young Allosaurus had to learn fast how to hunt, how to fight, how to stay out of the jaws of its elders. By adulthood, it was a master of the land, a creature that commanded both fear and respect. Its dominance was not just about physical power, but about adaptability. When prey was scarce, it scavenged. When rivals appeared, it fought or fled, depending on the odds. It was, in every sense, a survivor, a professional in the business of staying alive. Its reign, though glorious, was not eternal. By the end of the Jurassic, new competitors were emerging, new continents were drifting apart, and the world itself was shifting toward a different balance. But during its prime, for tens of millions of years, Allosaurus stood unchallenged. It was the top of the food chain, the measure by which all other predators would be compared. If you could stand in its shadow, you might feel the hum of its power before you even saw it, the deep, slow rhythm of muscle and bone designed for pursuit. Its eyes set forward would lock onto you not as a curiosity, but as a calculation, distance, speed, opportunity. And yet there's a strange intimacy in imagining it not as a monster, but as a creature, fulfilling its role, a participant in the vast humming web of Jurassic life. It hunted not out of cruelty but necessity. Its every step, every breath was part of the Earth's ongoing experiment in balance. To see it move through that misty forest, each stride deliberate, each flick of the tail precise, was to see evolution's artistry in motion. A living machine of bone and instinct, sharpened by time, thriving in a world that was as dangerous as it was beautiful. In its quiet moments, perhaps between hunts, Allosaurus might have stood among the trees, lifting its head to scent the damp air. The forest would murmur around it, the calls of smaller creatures, the rustle of leaves, the distant rumble of thunder. It would blink slowly, muscles relaxed, a master momentarily at peace in its kingdom. And if the earth could have spoken then, whispering through the rain and ferns, it might have said something simple and knowing, something like, "Run fast, hunt well, and remember, every forest needs its shadow." Brachiosaurus, the leaf-eating giant of the Jurassic skies. Imagine walking through a Jurassic forest at dawn. The air is thick with mist, the ground still cool from the night before. The trees tower above you, ancient conifers, cycads and ferns, whose fronds drip with dew. The silence is immense, broken only by the faint groan of trunks swaying in the breeze. Then somewhere in the distance, you hear it, a low, rumbling exhale, like the sound of wind moving through a canyon. The ground trembles slightly. You look up and up and up, and there it is, a mountain of muscle and grace, a living monument to the power of life itself. Brachiosaurus, the gentle giant of the Jurassic, at nearly 25 meters long and weighing more than 60 metric tons. Brachiosaurus altithorax. Its full formal name was one of the largest land animals ever to walk the earth. But what made it unique among its colossal kin was its posture. Most sauropods held their bodies like horizontal bridges, with necks sweeping out in graceful arcs parallel to the ground. Brachiosaurus, however, did something remarkable. It lifted its head high, its front legs longer than its hind legs, giving it the posture of a living skyscraper. It wasn't a creature that reached out into the world. It reached up. This upright design made Brachiosaurus a master of the canopy. While other herbivorous dinosaurs browsed low vegetation or mid-level branches, Brachiosaurus dined where no one else could reach. The tender shoots and crowns of the tallest conifers, with a neck estimated to stretch over 9 meters, it could effortlessly strip leaves from trees that towered 3 or 4 stories high. To those early forests, Brachiosaurus was both gardener and grazer, sculpting the treetops into a living landscape. And yet, despite its gargantuan size, there was a serenity to its existence. This was no predator, no thundering destroyer. It was a creature of patience and purpose, moving slowly but constantly through the green maze of its world. Its enormous heart pumped tirelessly, sending blood up its towering neck to a head that could look the clouds in the eye. Scientists estimate that its heart may have weighed more than 400 kilograms, a biological engine strong enough to circulate life through a body larger than most modern whales. The name Brachiosaurus means arm lizard, a reference to those long, pillar-like forelimbs that gave it its signature posture. Each limb was like the column of a temple, thick, vertical, and beautifully engineered to support unimaginable weight. Its bones were hollow in places, filled with air sacs that lightened the load without sacrificing strength. A design borrowed straight from the blueprint of birds. In fact, Brachiosaurus was not a lumbering brute, but a marvel of biological efficiency, a creature whose every curve, joint, and sinew had been perfected by evolution for the slow majesty of its lifestyle. Brachiosaurus lived primarily in what is now Africa and North America. Its fossils found in the Tendaguru Formation of Tanzania and the Morrison Formation of the western United States. In those days, around 15.4 to 150 million years ago, the continents were beginning to drift apart, but the climate across much of the globe was warm, humid, and richly vegetated. Africa's Jurassic landscape was not the desert of today, but a lush paradise of conifer forests, fern prairies, and wetlands that shimmered beneath the golden sun. It was a perfect home for a leaf eater that needed entire forests to sustain itself. Picture it moving through that world, enormous, deliberate, unstoppable. Its footsteps left craters in the soft earth, each one filling quickly with rainwater. Ferns bent beneath its belly, and trees shivered slightly as its shadow passed over them. Smaller dinosaurs, insects, and reptiles scattered from its path, not because it threatened them, but simply because it couldn't see them. It was an animal so large that the world itself seemed to part before it, and yet it moved with grace. Reconstructions suggest that Brachiosaurus could walk at a steady pace of 2 to 4 kilometers per hour, slow to us, but efficient for a creature whose strides covered several meters at a time. It didn't need to rush. The forest provided endless food, and predators, if they dared, would think twice before testing the patience of a creature that could crush them with a single misstep. Its size was its fortress, its calm demeanor, its quiet confidence. The diet of Brachiosaurus was a study in abundance. A single adult likely consumed hundreds of kilograms of vegetation each day. Conifer needles, cycads, ginkgos, and ferns formed its steady diet, though it was picky in its own way. Its teeth, spoon-shaped and arranged in rows along the front of its jaw, were designed not for grinding but for stripping. It would use its neck to reach a branch, rake the leaves into its mouth, and swallow them whole. Digestion happened later, deep in its vast gut, where fermenting microbes broke down the plant matter. The process was slow but efficient, like a living compost engine, turning greenery into energy with remarkable success. Unlike the sharp-eyed hunters of its world, Brachiosaurus had small, forward-placed eyes that gave it a gentle, almost sleepy look. But those eyes were perched high on its skull, granting it a panoramic view of its surroundings. From its lofty height, it could see over forests, rivers, and even distant herds of other sauropods. In its world, few sights were hidden. Despite its enormous lungs and deep resonant breathing, it likely made little sound. Perhaps a low rumble, subsonic vibrations felt more than heard, passed between individuals as they moved together. There is evidence to suggest that sauropods, including Brachiosaurus, may have communicated through low-frequency calls, the kind that could travel for kilometers through the ground. Imagine an invisible conversation rumbling beneath your feet, a dialogue between giants that shaped the rhythm of the forest. And yes, they may have traveled in small herds or family groups, though solitary individuals roamed as well. The fossil record hints at communal behavior, perhaps mothers with young or loose aggregations that moved between feeding grounds. In such gatherings, the sheer scale of life would have been overwhelming. Necks crossing like the masts of ships, tails swaying in slow unison, the ground alive with the quiet percussion of their steps. The forest that fed them must have seemed endless, and yet even Brachiosaurus could not consume without consequence. Its browsing habits shaped the structure of the ecosystem. By eating from the canopy, it pruned the forests, allowing sunlight to reach lower plants. Its droppings, rich in nutrients, fertilized the soil. In life and in death, it was a force of ecology, a creature whose existence transformed its world. Its skin, though long vanished, likely resembled that of modern elephants, thick, wrinkled, and covered with small, non-overlapping scales. It may have been a mottled grey or greenish-brown, blending with the foliage and bark around it. Some scientists speculate that younger individuals might have had brighter patterns, a kind of camouflage against predators, or perhaps even a display for social recognition. Either way, under the Jurassic sun, their skin would glisten faintly with moisture, alive with the slow pulse of blood beneath the surface. The neck of Brachiosaurus, perhaps its most striking feature, remains one of nature's greatest feats of design. Supported by a complex network of muscles, tendons, and air sacs, it could move fluidly, almost serpentine in its reach. The vertebrae, each one massive and beautifully shaped, locked together like puzzle pieces, providing both flexibility and strength. With that neck, it could sweep across wide swaths of forest without needing to move its body, conserving energy as it fed. When it lifted its head fully upright, it might have towered 13 meters above the ground, as high as a 4-story building. Now imagine that motion, the slow, graceful tilt of its neck as it reached for a branch, the gentle sway as it moved between trees, the rhythmic rise and fall of its chest as it breathed. There was poetry in that movement, a kind of calm that no predator could disrupt. Yet, even this gentle colossus faced challenges. Growing to such an enormous size required not only a vast appetite, but also precise biological timing. Young brachiosaurs likely grew rapidly, reaching half their adult size within a decade. The smaller they were, the more vulnerable they became, not to the giants of the forest, but to swift predators lurking at the edge of the clearings. Survival demanded constant awareness, steady growth, and perhaps the protection of a herd. As they matured, however, vulnerability gave way to invincibility. By adulthood, there were few creatures alive capable of harming a full-grown brachiosaurus. The earth itself became their only real rival. Storms, droughts, or the slow march of time. In that sense, their greatest predator was gravity, pulling relentlessly at every ton of muscle and bone. And still, they endured, their anatomy defying that weight through design and adaptation. Even their breathing was extraordinary. Air sacs connected to their lungs extended into their neck and torso, allowing them to circulate air continuously, a system remarkably similar to that of birds today. This made them not just efficient breathers, but surprisingly light on the inside. Evolution had found a way to make the impossible seem effortless. Standing beneath one, you'd likely feel insignificant, and yet not afraid. There was something tranquil about Brachiosaurus, something deeply ancient and wise. It was a creature that did not fight or flee, but simply existed in harmony with the land that sustained it. Its every breath was a dialogue with the forest, every movement a slow dance with gravity. To modernize, it might look alien, impossible. How could something so large even function? And yet in its time it was perfectly ordinary. The Jurassic world was built for giants, forests high enough, air rich enough, and ecosystems robust enough to sustain them. Brachiosaurus was not an accident. It was the inevitable outcome of an Earth that loved to grow things big. Perhaps on a quiet morning 150 million years ago, a herd of brachiosaurs moved through the mists of an African valley, their heads vanishing into clouds of pollen and light. Birds, tiny, primitive things, flitted around them, catching insects stirred by their steps. The air was filled with the smell of pine resin and crushed fern. Somewhere in that moment, the planet must have seemed at peace, content with its living architecture of bone and leaf. And if you could stand there, watching one pause beneath a tree, its breath slow, its eyes half closed as it reached up to pluck the highest leaves, you might understand what made the Jurassic so extraordinary. This was not just an age of monsters, it was an age of balance, of abundance, of coexistence. Brachiosaurus was its symbol, the embodiment of nature's capacity for elegance through scale. It was not loud, not savage, but profound, a creature that turned eating into art, breathing into endurance, existence into quiet triumph. And perhaps if the earth itself could have spoken as these titans moved through its forests, it would have whispered, with a fond smile and a sigh that shook the leaves above, "Eat well, my giant, grow tall, the sky belongs to you." Stegosaurus, the spiked warrior of the Jurassic forests. In the grand parade of Jurassic life, some dinosaurs dazzled with sheer size, others with speed, and still others with toothy menace. But few creatures captured the imagination quite like Stegosaurus, the spiked warrior of the Jurassic. With its double row of towering plates and tail armed with deadly spikes, it looked like something sculpted from a child's dream of dragons. A creature both elegant and absurd, peaceful and dangerous, slow but formidable. It was, in every sense, the armored knight of the prehistoric age. Picture this: the humid forests of late Jurassic North America, roughly 150 million years ago, thick with ferns and cycads. The air hums with insects. The ground is soft, layered with decaying leaves. And there, moving through shafts of golden light, comes a shape both beautiful and bewildering. 9 meters long from head to tail, nearly as long as a city bus, with a row of huge kite-shaped plates rising from its spine like sails in the wind. Stegosaurus stenops walks in slow, rhythmic steps, each movement a reminder that evolution sometimes chooses elegance over logic. It was not built for speed. With its short front legs and long, powerful hind legs, Stegosaurus moved with a forward tilt, its small head grazing close to the ground while its tail arched high behind it. Its gait was deliberate, its body swaying slightly with each step. It wasn't a sprinter, it was a living fortress, designed for endurance and defense. And yet, despite its heavy appearance, there was a strange grace to it, like a ship gliding through green waves of Jurassic vegetation. Stegosaurus belonged to the Ornithischian family, the bird-hipped dinosaurs, a group of herbivores that had mastered the art of survival through specialization. Where others evolved sheer size, Stegosaurus evolved armor, an array of 17 to 22 large plates that rose in two alternating rows along its back, from its neck to its tail. These plates, made of bone and covered in keratin, the same material as your fingernails, could reach over 60 centimeters tall. They were not fused directly to the skeleton, but embedded in the skin, much like the osteoderms of modern crocodiles. For decades, scientists debated their purpose. Were they defensive shields, thermoregulatory fins, display structures for attracting mates or intimidating rivals? The truth may be a mix of all three. The plates were filled with blood vessels, suggesting that they could have helped regulate body temperature, releasing excess heat like prehistoric radiators. But their shape and arrangement also made them visually striking, perfect for communication. A Stegosaurus flashing its plates in the dappled sunlight would have looked like a living billboard of warning, "I am not worth the trouble." And if any predator ignored that warning, there was still the Thagomizer. Yes, that's the delightfully unofficial name given to the spiked tail of Stegosaurus, a weapon so iconic it earned its own place in paleontological humor. The Thagomizer consisted of 4 to 6 long, lethal spikes, some over a meter in length, angled outward like the points of a deadly mace. This was no mere ornament. Fossil evidence shows that Stegosaurus could swing its tail with extraordinary force and precision. In fact, one Allosaurus fossil, a Jurassic predator that sometimes crossed paths with Stegosaurus, bears deep puncture wounds in its pelvic bone that match the spacing of Stegosaurus spikes perfectly. One well-placed strike could crush bone and end a confrontation instantly. So, while it might have looked docile, Stegosaurus was armed and dangerous when provoked. Its defensive strategy was simple but effective. Face the threat, pivot its hindquarters, and swing the tail like a living wrecking ball. The combination of muscle, momentum, and spikes turned its rear end into one of the deadliest zones in the Jurassic forest. If you were foolish enough to sneak up behind it, well, let's just say you wouldn't make the same mistake twice. But despite its fierce hardware, Stegosaurus was, at heart, an herbivore, a gentle grazer that spent its days feeding among the low-growing vegetation of Jurassic North America. Its head was comically small for its body, with a beak-like mouth and small leaf-shaped teeth, ideal for slicing soft plants. Its brain was even smaller, roughly the size of a walnut, about 80 grams in weight, tucked within a skull that could have fit in your hands. This has led to centuries of jokes about Stegosaurus being the dumbest dinosaur. Yet intelligence is always relative to need. For a creature whose life revolved around eating, walking, and avoiding danger, a larger brain would have been wasted energy. In truth, Stegosaurus didn't need to be clever. It was perfectly adapted to its world. Its sense of smell was decent, helping it locate tender shoots and ferns. Its eyes were positioned to scan for movement, alerting it to danger in the dense foliage, and its massive, muscular body gave it both protection and presence. In the moist, temperate forests of what is now Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah, that was more than enough to thrive. The forests it called home were vibrant mosaics of green and gold, dense conifer groves, open fern meadows, and swampy lowlands, where cycads and horsetails grew thick as reeds. In these environments, Stegosaurus likely moved in small herds or family groups, their plates rising like flags through the mist. Traveling together offered protection. A wall of swinging tails could deter even the hungriest predator. Perhaps they communicated through body posture or low-frequency sounds, rumbling through the ground as they foraged together. In the morning they might have basked in sunlight, absorbing warmth through their plates, dew glistening on the bony ridges. By midday they would have retreated into the shade, resting their massive bodies under the conifers while the air shimmered with heat. When the rains came, and they often did in the Jurassic, they would have moved through the downpour unbothered, their skin glistening, the water beading off the armored plates like jewels. Stegosaurus was not fast, but it was steady. Its long, muscular tail swayed gently as it walked, and its gait had a certain rhythm, slow, deliberate, with a faint thump each time its column-like legs met the ground. Each footstep pressed deep into the wet soil, leaving behind tracks that would harden into fossils, silent signatures of its patient passage through time. And yes, that brain, small though it was, had a partner. For years, scientists noticed a large cavity near the base of the spine and speculated, half seriously, that Stegosaurus had a second brain in its rear end, perhaps to control its massive tail. While we now know that this wasn't a brain at all but likely a glycogen storage center, a reserve of energy-rich tissue, the myth endures because it feels so fitting. After all, if any creature deserved a backup brain for multitasking, it was the one wielding a four-spiked tail the size of a medieval flail. But there's more to Stegosaurus than armor and absurdity. It was part of a broader evolutionary story, a success story of adaptation. Its ancestors had been small, bipedal herbivores, but over millions of years, evolution sculpted them into low-browsing quadrupeds built for defense and efficiency. The plates, the tail, the proportions, all of it was fine-tuned to match the demands of its environment. It didn't need to chase or flee. It needed only to endure. Even its posture, head low, tail high, served a purpose. By keeping its center of gravity low and its tail ready to swing, Stegosaurus could react quickly to threats. Its stiff tail muscles acted like springs, storing and releasing energy with each motion, and though its neck was short, it could sweep its head from side to side as it grazed, clearing broad patches of vegetation without moving its bulk. It was an herbivore of habit, methodical and efficient, stripping ferns and cycads with quiet diligence. To stand beside one would have been humbling. Its back plates rose higher than your head, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. Its skin, patterned perhaps in shades of grey, green, or rust, would ripple with every breath. You might hear the faint hiss of air as it exhaled through nostrils high on its snout, or the creak of tendons as it adjusted its massive frame. And if it turned toward you, blinking slowly with dark, gentle eyes, you might forget entirely that this was a creature with a tail designed for war. Yet, even peace has its limits. When threatened, the transformation was instantaneous. A Stegosaurus could pivot on its hind legs, tail arcing through the air in a deadly swing. The spikes would whistle through the wind, slicing branches, scattering leaves, and leaving deep gouges in anything unlucky enough to be nearby. In that moment, the gentle grazer became something primal, a reminder that even the most tranquil creatures carry the memory of survival in their bones. Fossil evidence tells us that Stegosaurus was a long-lived species, spanning several million years of dominance. Over that time, it adapted to subtle shifts in its environment, changing vegetation, new predators, and fluctuating climates. Its success lay not in aggression, but in resilience. It was, in a sense, a quiet ruler, never the fastest, never the fiercest, but always enduring. It's funny to think that the same animal that could impale a predator with its tail also inspired one of the most beloved silhouettes in paleontology. Few creatures are as instantly recognizable. Children sketch its plates before they can spell its name. Museums build entire dioramas around its gentle grandeur. It stands as a symbol of the Jurassic, not because it was the biggest or the smartest, but because it was distinctive. The world has never seen another quite like it, and perhaps that's what makes it so endearing. Stegosaurus seems to embody the paradox of nature itself. Strength wrapped in stillness, power disguised as peace. It didn't roar or chase or dominate. It simply existed, quietly magnificent, its armor gleaming under prehistoric sunlight. So, imagine now that forest again, the air heavy with the smell of rain and resin. A herd of Stegosaurus moves slowly through the undergrowth, plates glinting with moisture, tails swaying gently behind them. Their footsteps drum softly on the earth, their movements unhurried, their lives untroubled. In the distance, thunder rolls, a reminder that the world is vast and untamed. But here among the ferns, time seems to stand still. One of them pauses, head lowered, eyes calm. The air is still, save for the whisper of wind through the canopy. For a moment it's easy to believe that the earth itself is watching, proud of what it has shaped. And if the planet could speak in that moment, through the rustling leaves and the murmuring rain, it might whisper something playful, something proud, something true. Well done, my spiked warrior. Stand tall, eat well, and keep your tail sharp. Survival of the dinosaurs. Hunt, defend, adapt. If there is one law that ruled the Jurassic world, it was this: survive or vanish. Every creature, from the smallest lizard darting through the underbrush to the thunderous giants that shook the ground, lived under the same relentless rhythm. The earth was beautiful then, lush green dripping with humidity and life, but it was not gentle. The rain fell, the forests grew thick, and life competed in silence and in fury. To survive here was to master movement, strength, and instinct. And no one embodied the art of survival better than the dinosaurs. They were not just the biggest or the fiercest, they were the most adaptable. They evolved to fill every niche, to thrive in every shadow of the Jurassic forest. Some stalked, some grazed, some waited, but each, in its own way, played the ancient game of predator and prey, a balance as old as time itself. In that humid, tangled world, the theropods were the hunters. They were lean, muscular, and built for pursuit. Picture them, packs of bipedal predators, moving through the mist like ghosts, each step silent on damp soil. Their eyes, keen and unblinking, caught the faintest flicker of movement in the ferns. Their nostrils flared, tasting the air for the scent of flesh and blood. They did not run blindly. They coordinated. In groups they became a strategy given form, a living calculus of speed, power, and timing. When the moment came, they struck not in chaos, but in rhythm. One lunged, another flanked, a third circled to the rear. Their claws slashed, their teeth tore, their tails whipped for balance. It was quick, efficient, and terrible. The forest itself seemed to shudder when they moved as one. And yet, for all their violence, there was intelligence in the hunt. Survival required more than muscle. It demanded patience and cooperation. For the hunters of the Jurassic, life was a constant performance. Each kill a gamble, each chase a test. Even for the fiercest predator, failure meant hunger, and hunger, in a world of giants, was death. So they learned to conserve energy, to stalk rather than sprint, to ambush rather than chase. They were not mindless killers, but tactical survivors, creatures who lived by the rules of precision and restraint. But the predators were not alone in their craft. The hunted, too, were evolving, turning their bodies into fortresses of survival. The herbivores of the Jurassic were not meek victims. They were armored, enormous, and endlessly inventive in the ways they resisted death. The sauropods, those towering, long-necked giants, used the simplest and most effective defense of all: size. When you weigh as much as a house, you don't need to run, you just need to exist. Their sheer mass was a wall of deterrence. A predator might circle, prowl, or even test the edges of a herd, but to bring one down was a near impossible task. The bones of the largest sauropods were thicker than tree trunks, their legs as strong as pillars of living stone. Their long necks, which could reach into the treetops, were also tools of awareness. From that height, they could scan the horizon, their great eyes sweeping for movement. And if a predator dared approach, the herd would close ranks, the adults forming a moving barricade around their young. The air would rumble with low, resonant calls, warnings carried through the ground as much as through sound. It was not chaos, but strategy. They didn't fight like wolves. They defended like cities. And when all else failed, even these gentle herbivores had power enough to make the earth itself take notice. One swing of a tail, long, muscular, and tipped with bone, could break a predator's ribs or send it tumbling into the ferns. Some tails were said to move so fast they cracked like thunder, a sound that echoed through the valleys as both warning and victory. In the humid forests where sound carried for miles, that whip crack of defense was unmistakable. It said, plainly, "Do not try." The ornithischians, meanwhile, had taken an entirely different path to survival. If the sauropods were walls, The ornithischians were fortresses their bodies were masterpieces of defense. Rows of bony plates, sharp horns, and tails that could make even the boldest predator reconsider its appetite. Evolution had sculpted them into living armor. When danger came, these plant eaters didn't flee in panic. They braced themselves, lowering their heads, turning flanks, and standing their ground. Many species developed elaborate displays of spikes and ridges that served double duty, intimidating foes while attracting mates. Bright patterns may have flashed along their hides, signaling health and strength. To survive was to advertise, "I am here, and I am dangerous to touch." Even their bones told stories of endurance. Healed bite marks, fused fractures, and scarred armor plates reveal creatures that didn't just survive attacks. They walked away from them. Each scar was a medal, proof that life was not just about winning battles, but surviving them. In these dense forests and fog-shrouded plains, strategy was survival. The plant eaters moved in groups for safety, the predators in packs for success. The young stayed close to the herd, the old stood guard, and even the smallest creatures learned the art of caution. Every movement, every sound, every shadow had meaning. The Jurassic was not a world of endless violence. It was a world of constant vigilance. To live in such an ecosystem required more than teeth or armor. It required adaptation. The Earth itself demanded it. The climate was warm and humid, the forests thick with life. The air was rich with oxygen and moisture, carrying the smells of rain and resin. To survive here, animals evolved bodies that could handle the heat, lungs that could drink in dense air, and behaviors that matched the pulse of the land. The predators, theropods with their lean frames and hollow bones, were built to move lightly in this heavy air. Their lungs worked like bellows, pushing air through sacs that kept their bodies cool, even in the stifling humidity. Their skin, perhaps feathered or scaled, offered protection without trapping heat. They were living machines designed to thrive in warmth. The herbivores, on the other hand, had to endure constant exertion, eating enough to feed their massive bodies while avoiding exhaustion. Their metabolism was slow but steady, their digestion supported by massive gut chambers that fermented plant matter into energy. The moist climate helped them. Plants grew year-round, providing a continuous feast. But it also meant the air was heavy with scent, making stealth impossible, so they adapted in other ways. Group living, armor, vigilance. The forests themselves shaped their lives. The towering conifers created pockets of deep shadow and sudden sunlight. In those contrasts, predators hid and prey moved cautiously. The undergrowth was a sea of ferns and cycads, perfect for concealment but dangerous for the unwary. The constant rainfall softened the ground, leaving tracks and scents that told stories to any creature clever enough to read them. The Jurassic world was not just alive, it was alert. For all their strength, the dinosaurs did not rule by dominance alone. They ruled because they listened to the earth. When floods came, they migrated to higher ground. When droughts followed, they gathered near rivers. They learned the seasons, even if they didn't name them, and followed the rhythm of rain and growth. They were, in every sense, creatures of adaptation, biological poets writing in motion, improvising to the tune of survival. Some hunted under the cover of storms, using thunder and wind to mask their approach. Others basked in the rare dry patches of sun to warm their blood after long, wet nights. Even their senses evolved to fit the dense, green silence of their world. Vision sharpened, smell heightened, hearing attuned to the softest crack of a twig. The forest humidity, far from being a hindrance, became a silent ally. The air carried signals, vibrations, sounds, scents that wove a constant web of communication. To survive in the Jurassic meant learning to read that web, to sense danger before it appeared. A predator might pause mid-step, nostrils twitching, head turning toward a whisper of movement. A herbivore might freeze mid-bite as a new scent drifted through the air. 1 second of hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. And yet, amid the tension of constant alertness, there was an equilibrium. The balance between hunter and hunted was not chaos. It was a dance. A chase through ferns, a retreat into rivers, a standoff beneath the trees. For every predator that succeeded, dozens failed. For every herbivore that fell, another lived to feed its young. The system was brutal, but it was fair. Nature had no malice, only motion. In this great dance of survival, even the smallest adaptations mattered. Some dinosaurs evolved better color vision, distinguishing ripe fruit or fresh leaves. Others developed keen night senses, claiming the cooler hours when larger predators slept. Some grew feathers or skin flaps that could help them regulate temperature or display dominance. Every adaptation was a story written in bone, a record of what it took to endure. There was no such thing as comfort in the Jurassic. Every moment was an act of perseverance. The heat, the rain, the predators, the scarcity, they were all tests. And yet, through all of it, life thrived. The forests were alive with movement, the rivers teeming with life, the skies patrolled by winged reptiles. The dinosaurs were not just survivors, they were the architects of endurance. They found ways to turn even their weaknesses into weapons. A slow creature became a wall of flesh and bone. A small creature became invisible in the undergrowth. A predator that failed to catch one prey learned to catch another. Evolution was not kind, but it was patient. And in that patience, the dinosaurs flourished for more than 150 million years. Longer than mammals have yet managed. Longer than humans can even imagine. Their success was not luck, it was persistence, a steady partnership with the Earth's chaos. They adapted not once, but endlessly, until change itself became their nature. It's easy to think of them as ancient and gone, but in truth, their lesson is eternal. To survive is to move with the world, not against it. To sense its moods, its whispers, its storms, and to answer them with resilience. The dinosaurs didn't conquer the Earth by force, they belonged to it completely. So imagine now for a moment the humid breath of the Jurassic forest, the mist curling between the trees, the sound of footsteps in the ferns, soft, deliberate, alive. Somewhere a predator waits, poised for the right moment. Somewhere else, a herd moves together, silent and alert. The earth hums around them, indifferent yet generous. And if the planet could speak, if it could lean close through the leaves and the rain, it might offer them the same advice it has whispered to every living thing since the dawn of time. Stay sharp, stay moving, survive, because that's what life was made for. The continental ecosystem, where dinosaurs and the earth danced together. If you could stand just for a heartbeat in the middle of a Jurassic forest, you would see not chaos, but choreography. Every sound, every movement, every tremor of the ground would be part of a rhythm older than memory. The earth, lush and humid, was not merely a backdrop to dinosaur life. It was a living partner, shaping, feeding, and challenging every creature that walked upon it. The land of the Jurassic was a masterpiece of balance, a theatre where trees and thunder lizards performed in perfect synchrony. The continents then were vast and full of life, stitched together by great river valleys, rolling floodplains, and endless conifer forests. The air shimmered with heat and the smell of pine resin. Giant ferns carpeted the ground, cycads clustered like shrubs, and trees soared skyward, their crowns interlocking to form cathedrals of green. It was within these shadowed groves and open wetlands that the great drama of dinosaur ecology unfolded, a play of hunters and grazers, trees and teeth, all guided by the invisible hand of balance. In the conifer forests, the kings were the sauropods. These long-necked titans moved through the towering pines like ships through a sea of wood and light. Their massive bodies pushed through the undergrowth, creating clearings wherever they went, their necks swaying gently as they reached for the highest branches. The trees in turn grew stronger and taller, competing for sunlight, evolving harder bark and faster-growing needles to withstand their enormous guests. It was an ancient, mutual pact. The trees offered nourishment, and the sauropods shaped the forest in return, spreading seeds in their wake. Every step of a sauropod changed the land. Their enormous feet compressed soil, creating pathways that channeled rainwater and carved new streams. Their droppings, mountains of nutrient-rich compost, fertilized the earth, feeding ferns and mosses that sprouted in their tracks. Where these giants walked to, the land renewed itself. Even the insects benefited, swarming to feed on decaying vegetation and dung, while small reptiles and early mammals followed to snatch the insects. The forest was alive from canopy to soil, each layer tied to the next. Further out, beyond the forests, lay the swamps and floodplains, home to the smaller but no less fascinating herbivores, the ornithoschons. These creatures preferred the wetter, softer landscapes, where cycads and horsetails grew in abundance. The air here was heavy with moisture and buzzing with insects. Dragonflies as wide as dinner plates skimmed the water's surface, and amphibians croaked from the shallows. In these damp havens, the plant-eating dinosaurs moved in groups, feeding on low vegetation and wading through the mud with practiced ease. Their bodies, built for defense and endurance, blended into the greenery. The swamps provided both food and safety. When danger came, they could retreat into the shallows, their heavy forms churning up mud as they went. Their young played near the edges, splashing in the warm water, learning the instincts of caution. The swamp was a nursery as much as a home, a living cradle of survival. Above them, in the drier uplands and forest clearings, the theropods prowled. These were the predators of the continental ecosystem, two-legged, sharp-eyed, and endlessly patient. Their domain was not limited to one terrain. They crossed rivers, crept through forests, and stalked the edges of herds. They knew the scent of every species, the rhythm of every migration. Sometimes they hunted alone, silent shadows slipping between trees. Other times they moved in pairs or small groups, using teamwork to bring down prey too large for one set of jaws. The interaction between predator and prey was a delicate conversation, a constant push and pull that kept the ecosystem in balance. A herd of herbivores that grew too large would soon draw hunters to cull the weak and the slow. Too few herbivores, and the predators would struggle, forcing them to move elsewhere or turn scavenger. Nature was not cruel in this. It was practical, efficient. Every death fed 100 lives. Every chase, every fallen leaf, every rumble of thunder had its place in the endless cycle. Even the smallest creatures had their roles. Insects pollinated the plants that fed the dinosaurs. Tiny mammals and reptiles scavenged leftovers from carcasses, spreading nutrients back into the soil. Microbes broke down waste, recycling matter into life again. It was a closed loop of energy and transformation, a kind of natural orchestra where no note was ever lost, only passed along, reshaped, and played again. The food chain of the Jurassic land was a web of elegant simplicity. At its roots were the plants, conifers, cycads, ferns, and horsetails, drawing energy from the sun and the rich carbon dioxide of the air. They grew thick and fast in the warm, moist climate, creating the green foundation for everything that followed. The herbivores were the next layer, converting plant energy into motion, into the slow march of sauropods and the nervous grazing of smaller dinosaurs. Then came the carnivores, lean and alert, channeling that energy into the swift precision of the hunt. Above them all hovered the scavengers and decomposers, waiting to reclaim whatever remained. Nothing was wasted. When a dinosaur fell, whether to a predator or old age, it became a feast. First came the carnivores, tearing flesh from bone with quick, efficient bites. Then the smaller creatures arrived, insects, lizards, and tiny mammals picking at the scraps. Finally, the bacteria and fungi took over, breaking down what was left into nutrients for the soil. Within weeks, the bones would be all that remained, and even they would eventually crumble back into the earth. In the conifer forests, the cycles of life were measured not in seasons but in centuries. Trees rose and fell, trunks hollowed by fungi, roots tangled by time. The sauropods moved through generations of growth, feeding the land as much as they fed themselves. In the swamps, the rhythm was faster. Floods came and went, reshaping the terrain, forcing life to adapt again and again. Some herbivores evolved wide feet to navigate the mud, others longer snouts to crop aquatic plants. Every habitat offered a test, and every test gave rise to a new solution. The interaction between dinosaurs and their environment was not one-sided. They shaped each other, molded by necessity and opportunity. The forests grew tall because of the giants that ate them. The plains flourished because herds kept them open. Even the swamps were sculpted by the trampling of feet and the churning of tails. The earth and its creatures were in constant dialogue, an exchange of matter, motion, and meaning. And what a world it must have been to see. Imagine a dawn where the mist lies thick over a fern meadow, and a herd of long-necked sauropods moves slowly through it, their silhouettes fading in and out of view like ships in fog. Smaller herbivores browse nearby, ears twitching at every sound. In the distance, a predator calls, a long, rising note that echoes through the trees. The sound fades, replaced by the whisper of wind in the branches and the distant rush of water. This is not a moment of peace or fear, but of balance, a living stillness that hums with potential energy. Even the weather was a character in this ancient story. The humidity fed the forests, the rain carved the valleys, and the storms stirred the rivers that nourished every creature. Lightning flashed over treetops as tall as cathedrals, thunder rolling for miles through the jungle. Afterward, the rain left puddles so large that herds could drink for hours, their reflections rippling in the brown water. And somewhere nearby, plants sprouted anew, feeding on the minerals left behind. It is tempting to think of dinosaurs as separate from their world, as colossal animals simply existing in a prehistoric landscape. But they were not guests on that land. They were its caretakers, its architects. Their feeding patterns maintained the forests. Their migrations spread seeds and nutrients across vast distances. Their bodies in life and death sustained the ecosystems that surrounded them. Without them, the Jurassic world would have been a quieter, poorer place. The conifer forests were more than shelter. They were engines of life. The trees released oxygen and shade, providing refuge from the heat. Mosses and ferns beneath them formed thick carpets that trapped moisture, creating microhabitats for smaller creatures. When a giant tree fell, it didn't end life, it created it. Insects burrowed into the decaying wood, fungi spread their delicate threads through it, and young plants sprouted in the clearing. And soon enough, a herd of plant eaters would wander through, nibbling on the new growth, keeping the cycle turning. The swamps, by contrast, were theatres of tension. Here predator and prey met often. The mud muffled footsteps, the reeds obscured sight. A predator could stalk silently through the shallows, every ripple a message of intent. A startled herbivore could vanish with a splash, water and mud exploding in all directions. These were the places where strategy was born, where instinct sharpened into art. Yet, despite the constant threat of predation, the balance held. The hunters never destroyed their prey, and the prey never stripped the land bare. Nature was its own accountant, managing abundance and scarcity with perfect arithmetic. When rains were plentiful, the herds grew fat, and the forests thickened. When drought struck, numbers fell, and the cycle reset. In every fluctuation, the system remained intact, a living machine tuned by deep time. And through it all, the earth itself participated. The volcanic mountains in the distance exhaled minerals that enriched the soil. Rivers carried those nutrients across plains, feeding the forests. The dinosaurs, in turn, fed the earth back through their movement, waste, and death. The soil grew richer, the plants stronger, and the air thicker with life. The entire world was a feedback loop, a self-sustaining miracle of chemistry and biology. To live there, amid that balance, was to be part of something vast. The dinosaurs didn't just walk on the earth, they completed it. They were its heartbeat, its thunder, its motion made visible. In every footstep the land answered. The trees bent slightly under the weight of their passing. The rivers widened where they drank. The soil darkened where they rested. The planet and its creatures were partners, not rivals, in a relationship both ancient and intimate. If you could step into that world, you'd feel it instantly. The pulse beneath your feet, the breath of the forest on your skin, the sense that every living thing was aware of its place in the great design. The predators knew their role as sculptors of fear. The herbivores knew theirs as stewards of abundance. The plants reached for the light, and the earth, patient and amused, whispered beneath them all. And perhaps if you listened closely enough, over the hum of insects and the rustle of leaves, you could hear that whisper saying, "Feed and be fed, grow and be eaten, Run and chase and rest. For this is not chaos, it's harmony. The land and its children dance together, and the music never stops. Fossils and discovery, messages from the Jurassic Earth. Imagine the world as a storyteller, one who never used ink or words but stone and bone. For millions of years, the Earth has been quietly writing, burying its chapters under layers of mud, sand, and time. When we unearth fossils, we are not simply digging, we are reading. Each fossil is a sentence, each layer a paragraph, and together they form one of the greatest stories ever told, the life and legacy of the Jurassic world. The Jurassic period, stretching from about 2000 to 45 million years ago, left behind a treasure trove of clues about the creatures that roamed its forests, swamps, and floodplains. These clues come in many forms: bones, teeth, footprints, nests, even the faint impressions of skin or plants pressed into rock. Each fragment is a whisper from deep time, preserved by luck and geology. Together they allow us to reconstruct a world that vanished long before humans ever appeared. Among the most famous of these fossil archives is the Morrison Formation, an enormous stretch of sedimentary rock that winds through the heart of North America, from New Mexico up to Montana. This formation is more than a collection of stones. It is a window into an age of giants. Discovered in the late 19th century during what paleontologists fondly, and a bit dramatically, call the Bone Wars, the Morrison Formation has yielded some of the most spectacular dinosaur fossils ever found. Here, in sandstone and shale colored by ancient rivers, the bones of Jurassic life rest in eternal stillness. The rock layers record a story of floodplains and lakes, of forests that once whispered with the movements of sauropods and the calls of predators. Every excavation, every brushstroke on a fossil, uncovers not just a bone, but a fragment of behavior, a glimpse of motion that once rippled through this ancient world. One can almost picture it. Tens of millions of years ago, a herd of dinosaurs crossing a shallow river, their heavy feet pressing into the wet sediment. The sun beats down, the air thick with humidity. Hours later, the footprints dry. Then, with time and layers of silt, they harden into stone. When we find them today, perfectly preserved, each toe and claw distinct, we're looking at a literal moment in time, frozen in place. The mud became memory. The fossil record of the Morrison Formation reads like a catalogue of Jurassic diversity. Massive sauropods once lumbered here, leaving behind vertebrae the size of barrels and femurs taller than a human. Theropods stalked these same lands, their teeth serrated and sharp, found scattered among the bones of prey. Herbivores left behind beak fragments and plates of armor, each hinting at their diet and defense. Even the smallest creatures, tiny lizards, frogs, and early mammals, appear in the fine sediments, a reminder that life at every scale was thriving. What makes these fossils remarkable is not just their size, but their stories. A sauropod vertebra can tell us about the structure of lungs and muscles. A tooth can reveal diet. A healed fracture in a leg bone hints at survival after injury. Proof that even 150 million years ago, life could be both brutal and resilient. When paleontologists find a nest of eggs, or the remains of juveniles alongside adults, they read evidence of behavior, care, protection, perhaps even social bonds. Fossils are more than remnants. They are recordings of ancient relationships. Some fossils are so well preserved that they capture movement itself. Trackways, long sequences of footprints show how dinosaurs walked, ran, and even interacted. In certain sites, parallel tracks suggest herds moving together, side by side through soft mud. Smaller prints sometimes appear alongside larger ones, perhaps juveniles keeping pace with adults. In others, predator and prey tracks intersect, a silent record of pursuit. Each footprint is a heartbeat of the past, pressed forever into stone. And then there are the surprises, moments where the earth outdoes even imagination. Occasionally, fossils preserve impressions of skin or feathers, the delicate outlines of scales and textures that once covered muscle and bone. Some show bite marks, gouges left behind by predators that missed their mark. Others contain mineralized remains of plants, seeds, and even stomach contents, revealing what these creatures ate and how they lived. In a few extraordinary cases, scientists have even discovered the chemical traces of pigments, suggesting that the dinosaurs of the Jurassic may not have been the dull, grey beasts of old textbooks, but creatures clothed in vibrant shades of green, red, or bronze. In many ways, the Morrison Formation and similar fossil beds act like the Earth's photo album. Each layer of rock captures a snapshot from a different chapter of deep time. The deeper you go, the older the story becomes. In some layers, you find bones scattered and broken, perhaps the aftermath of a flood. In others, you find complete skeletons, still aligned in life position, as if the creatures simply lay down and never rose again. Together, they form a geological timeline, written not in ink, but in pressure and stone. The work of unlocking these stories is equal parts science and patience. Paleontologists must first find the fossils, no easy feat given that most lie buried under millions of years of sediment. Often they begin with the faintest clue, a sliver of bone weathering out of a cliff, or the outline of a footprint revealed by erosion. From there they dig, carefully peeling away layers of earth with brushes, chisels, and awl. The goal is to expose the fossil without damaging it, a process that can take weeks, months, or even years. And when the fossil finally emerges, gleaming white against red or grey stone, it feels almost ceremonial, as if the past itself is exhaling after a long silence. These bones, once alive with movement, now lie still, but speak volume. Each one offers data, where tendons attached, how muscles worked, how joints flexed. By comparing fossils from different sites, scientists can reconstruct entire ecosystems, charting who lived where, who hunted whom, and how species changed over time. But fossils do not tell their stories easily. They are riddles written in fragments. Often, a single species is known from just a handful of bones, forcing scientists to play a kind of evolutionary jigsaw puzzle. Missing pieces must be guessed from close relatives, patterns compared, hypotheses tested and revised. It is slow work, full of uncertainty, but also full of wonder. To hold a bone that has lain untouched for 150 million years is to touch time itself, to feel, quite literally, the weight of history in your hands. The Morrison Formation is not the only place that keeps these secrets, of course. Across the world, from Tanzania's Tendaguru beds to China's Shishugu Formation, similar deposits have revealed the astonishing breadth of Jurassic life. Fossilized forests still stand upright in ancient rock, their trunks mineralized into stone. In some regions, entire fossilized floodplains have been uncovered, complete with tree roots, leaves, and trackways. The earth is generous with its memories, if you know where to look. One of the most fascinating aspects of these discoveries is how fossil evidence evolves with technology. In the early days, paleontologists could only describe shapes and sizes. Today, they can scan fossils with lasers and CT machines, building three-dimensional models of bones, muscles, and even blood vessels. Chemical analysis can detect the traces of ancient proteins or the isotopic signatures that reveal what a creature ate. In effect, we are learning not just what the dinosaurs looked like, but how they lived, how they breathed, moved, and interacted with their world. Even footprints, once seen merely as curiosities, have become central to understanding behavior. They show speed, gait, and even emotion. A moment of panic frozen in stone, or a slow meandering path through the ferns. Some tracks reveal entire herd migrations, the same patterns repeated across miles. Others capture rare events, like predators wading through rivers or herbivores rearing up to feed. In these tracks we find the pulse of the living world, recorded one step at a time. Of course, the fossil record is never complete. For every skeleton we uncover, thousands more remain hidden, lost to erosion or time. Some were destroyed before discovery, others are waiting quietly for the right storm, the right season, the right set of eyes. The earth guards its secrets carefully, revealing them only to those who ask with patience. Yet every new find, no matter how small, adds another brushstroke to the portrait of the Jurassic, a painting that is vast, complex, and still unfinished. The humor of it all is that so much of what we know about these immense creatures comes from the tiniest clues: a single tooth, a cracked bone, a few footprints across ancient mud. From such modest fragments, we reconstruct entire worlds. It's a bit like building an orchestra from one note, but when that note is 150 million years old, even a whisper is extraordinary. And then there's the delightful chaos of interpretation. For every fossil there are debates, scientists arguing cheerfully, and sometimes not so cheerfully, about what the evidence means. Was this bone part of a new species, or just a variation of one already known? Did this creature run fast, or lumber slowly? Was that gash on its rib made by a predator, or by another member of its own kind? The answers shift as new discoveries are made, and in that shifting, science remains alive. Paleontology, for all its fossils, is a living field, full of passion, curiosity, and the occasional good-natured argument over lunch. Each discovery, no matter how small, rewrites part of what we thought we knew. Once we imagined dinosaurs as cold-blooded, sluggish beasts. Fossils later told us they were active, complex, perhaps even warm-blooded. Once we saw them as scaly and grey. Now, thanks to delicate imprints and molecular traces, we imagine them feathered, patterned, vibrant. The stones have corrected us, gently but firmly again and again. And yet, for all our science, there remains mystery. Fossils are generous with information, but they never give everything away. We can measure their bones, reconstruct their muscles, estimate their movements, but we can never hear their calls, see their colours with certainty, or know how it felt to live among them. The Earth keeps some secrets for itself. Still, there's magic in what we can know. To walk through a museum hall, lined with Jurassic fossils, is to step into deep time. The bones arch overhead like the ribs of an ancient cathedral, each one whispering a different verse of the same song. The long necks curve gracefully toward the ceiling. The teeth glint under soft lights. Beneath them, children stare upward, wide-eyed, while scientists take notes in quiet awe. It's a communion across time, between life long gone and life that endures. Every fossil, every footprint, is a conversation between past and present. The bones may be silent, but the Earth is not. It hums beneath our feet, reminding us that its history is still unfolding, still waiting to be read. When paleontologists kneel in the dust, brushing away grains of rock to reveal the curve of a bone, they are not grave diggers, they are translators, bringing back the voices of the deep past. And perhaps if the Earth could speak as they worked, if the stones themselves could murmur their approval, it would sound something like this. You've found another page, little ones. Be gentle. This is my memory you're holding. And now, as our journey through deep time comes gently to an end, let's take one last look across the vast stage of the Jurassic. The lights of that ancient world are dimming, but their echoes linger, warm, alive, and endless. It was a time when continents drifted apart like slow-moving dreams, when Pangaea fractured and the newborn oceans began to breathe. The Earth was finding its rhythm, shaping itself anew. The air was warm, the rain generous, and life, oh life, overflowed in every corner. Forests whispered beneath a heavy sky, rivers curled through fern valleys, and creatures of impossible form walked where no human foot would tread for another 100 million years. This was the Golden Age of the Dinosaurs, a time of both grandeur and grace. Giants stretched their necks toward the canopy, while hunters moved like living shadows between the trees. The Earth had never been so alive, so full of sound and motion. Each species carved its story into the land, some in the whisper of leaves, others in the thunder of footsteps. Here, the great predators ruled with precision and cunning. The mighty plant-eaters towered like moving mountains, patient and eternal. The armored ones, bristling with plates and spikes, guarded their peace with quiet defiance. Together they formed a world that balanced perfectly between creation and survival, a world where strength met harmony and beauty met danger. The forests, the swamps, the rivers, all of them pulsed with this rhythm. The Earth itself seemed to hum with contentment, as if proud of what it had made, and high above, in skies unbroken by human eyes, winged creatures glided effortlessly on the warm winds, their cries vanishing into the horizon. It is easy to think of the Jurassic as a world long gone, buried beneath time and dust. Yet, in truth, it still lives, in every fossil unearthed, in every echo of wind across stone, in the lineage of birds that carry the memory of flight. First found in those ancient skies, the dinosaurs never truly vanished. They transformed as all things must, and left behind a world forever marked by their greatness. The Jurassic reminds us of what Earth can be when it dreams big, when it builds forests that touch the clouds, creatures that defy logic, and systems that sustain themselves through perfect balance. It was not a time of chaos, but of becoming. The planet was young, learning its shape, testing its possibilities, and in that long experiment of creation, it found poetry in teeth and leaves, in thunder and silence. So as we close this chapter, let the image linger. A warm sun rising over a prehistoric forest, steam curling from the earth, and the silhouettes of giants moving slowly through the mist. The air vibrates with life, the earth breathes deeply. Somewhere, a predator calls, and a herd stirs in response. The Golden Age continues, eternal in memory if not in time. The story of the Jurassic is not only about dinosaurs, it's about the Earth herself, alive in her youth, bold and unafraid to create beauty through transformation. It is a reminder that everything changes, and that in change there is wonder. And now, dear traveller through time, perhaps it is your turn to rest. Let the echoes of this ancient world drift through your mind like soft rain over ferns. Imagine the ground beneath you breathing slowly, the stars above watching quietly, and the distant rumble of creatures who once ruled the world. The Earth has told her story tonight, the story of separation and unity, of growth and survival, of life at its most magnificent. Sleep well, and dream of that golden world, where the forests were endless. The giants walked with grace, and the earth whispered gently to all who listened, "This was my golden age."